Chapter 1189. Water splashed from the air, splashing a crystal light. Silently, Li Tianlan appeared beside Wang Yuexiang and said casually, "Why do you want to go back all of a sudden?" Wang Yuexiang suddenly turned her head. She looked at Li Tianlan beside her, and then at the huge black sword in the center of the fountain square. There was still Li Tianlan's shadow at the top of the huge sword. As the wind blew, the shadow gradually faded and disappeared. Wang Yuexiang's eyes flickered slightly. Her real strength was very close to the peak of the invincible realm, and she was an invincible realm expert who focused on swordsmanship. Among the 12 super masters of the Samsara Palace in the past, even now, she deserved to be the first in terms of strength. Her combat capability was definitely above that of saint and military counselor. In today's dark world, Wang Yuexiang, who used to be flaming fire, could definitely be regarded as the top swordsmanship expert. But at the moment when Li Tianlan moved and appeared beside her, she didn't feel any sword energy. There was no sword energy, sword intent, or sword light. The surrounding space was stable and flat. Therefore, not only in her sight, but also in her perception, Li Tianlan's appearance was extremely abrupt. In this state, Li Tianlan was as if he had become a part of the air. Extreme nothingness, but absolutely real. Wang Yuexiang's heart tightened slightly, and even her scalp was a little numb. This was not an emotion like fear, or defense and vigilance. She believed that Li Tianlan had no malice toward her. This emotion that shouldn't be present at the moment was the almost instinctive nervousness of an expert. Just at that moment, if Li Tianlan wanted to, Wang Yuexiang knew very well that she would be dead now. Not long ago, Li Tianlan had killed Zhu, an invincible realm killer in the Dark World, with one blow at Huading Airport, which shocked the whole Dark World. This had proved that Li Tianlan had the strength to kill an invincible realm expert in an instant. Wang Yuexiang's strength was much stronger than Zhu's. But this was not the most important thing. The most important thing was Li Tianlan's action. Compared with the horrifying blow at Huading Airport, Li Tianlan was not as strong as Huading Airport. Now Li Tianlan didn't need any so-called momentum. He didn't need to accumulate strength or wave the sword. He was calm and natural. Wang Yuexiang clearly realized a fact. If Li Tianlan wanted to kill him, he didn't need to do anything at all. He just needed to move. From this point of view, stepping on an ant and killing an invincible realm expert only required a slight movement. Li Tianlan didn't even need to gather any sword energy. A random sword chi of the fire-flaming realm, the ice-condensing realm, or even the chi-controlling realm could directly kill an invincible realm expert. Because no one could see his movements anymore. Eyes can't see. He couldn't sense it. He appeared beside her like air. It wasn't fast, but it was extremely sudden. This was no longer a sneak attack or not. This kind of abruptness had at least exceeded the reaction speed of an invincible realm expert. Since he came out of the desert, Li Tianlan seemed to have been making progress at a crazy speed. He approached the peak, stood at the peak, and now he had almost surpassed the peak. In Mochizuki-sang's eyes, this silent step was truly unfathomable. Mochizuki-sang took a deep breath to calm himself down and said, "The situation in Europe is a little chaotic. I've been away for too long. Now that I've recovered, it's time to go back. The European continent now has the Snowdance Corps. No matter how chaotic the situation is, the Dark Knights will not have any problems." Li Tianlan smiled faintly and stepped out of the fountain square. The current situation in Europe could be said to be a chaotic mess. The decisive battle in North Sea had directly shaken the structure and foundation of the Dark World. The headquarters of Sanctum was directly attacked by the Dark Knights and Rothschild and suffered heavy losses. The old man, who could be said to be supreme in the spiritual field, finally had to choose to temporarily leave the headquarters of Sanctum. The Holy Disarmament Corps was almost completely broken up. The Dark Knights and Rothschild began to expand after stabilizing their footing. The entire European Union was in turmoil. The shadow throne formed by the European Union was even more turbulent. In the final battle of Beihai, Wang Xingxiao's strong rise at the last moment almost wiped out Beihai. Hostile forces. Who are those hostile forces? Almost all the elite forces of the Dark World were gathered there, and most of the second-class forces were swept away. The current European continent was like a deep pool of muddy water. The few second-rate forces that did not participate in the North Sea showdown saw an opportunity to continue growing stronger. Meanwhile, after the elite forces were wiped out, the leaderless second-rate forces began to band together. The Holy Disarmament Corps was planning to return to Sanctum. Rothschild, who had been silent for several years, also began to move. They joined forces with the Dark Knights to attack Sanctum, but there was no cooperation in external expansion. It was said that Paul, the current patriarch of Rothschild, had begun to integrate the forces in the Shadow Throne. The Dark Knights remained calm and collected, but some countries in the European Union had begun to test the attitude of the Dark Knights. In addition, the Knights Templars had risen suddenly and vaguely had the tendency to become another superpower in Europe. It was only after the start of the decisive battle in North Sea that the Dark World discovered that the Knights Templars had already left Sanctum and started to establish themselves. The existence of more aid made everyone not dare to underestimate the strength of the Knights Templars. The current European continent could be said to be surging with undercurrents. Although various forces maintained a certain degree of restraint, small-scale conflicts and confrontations occurred all the time. Mochizuki Song's injury had basically recovered. Her return was self-evident to the Dark Knights. The Dark Knights need me now. Mochizuki Song walked silently beside Li Tianlan. And it's not suitable for the Dark Knights to stay where they are. Now the European continent is very chaotic, and there are opportunities in troubled times. No matter from which point of view, the expansion of the Dark Knights is imperative, and it's also good for everyone. Li Tianlan walked silently and did not speak. Mochizuki Song twitched the corner of her mouth and continued, and it is said that Wang Xiaoyao has returned to Snow Country. His power in Snow Country is very strong. I'm afraid that the Snowdance Corps won't have an easy time, right? Wang Xiaoyao is not a concern. Li Tianlan shook his head. Let's wait and stay here for a while. There are a lot of things to do recently. When I'm done, I'll go to Europe with you. You're going to Europe? Mochizuki Song frowned slightly. Am I not welcome? Li Tianlan turned his head and glanced at her with a faint smile. The night was like water. The two gradually left the fountain square and walked aimlessly in the quiet night of Emperor Dong's palace. Mochizuki Song was silent for a long time before she slowly said, I can wait for you in Europe. The expansion of Emperor Dong's palace was imperative. East Island, Zhongzhou State, Tun. Li Tianlan now had enough strength, so he naturally needed enough power. Today's Emperor Dong's palace was very strong, but it was strong in high-end combat capability, the absolute cohesion that only belonged to the new power, and the endless wealth brought by the Flourishing Age Fund. But the foundation of Emperor Dong's palace was not deep. Xianyuan City was the absolute core of Emperor Dong's palace. And the Xianxia province of Zhongzhou State could only be regarded as half of it. The giant group could only be regarded as an absolutely reliable ally. Li Tianlan had money, people, and strength. Naturally, he needed to turn the wealth in his hands into real influence and expand his foundation. What Emperor Dong's palace would do next was completely predictable. It was inevitable to unify Tianan, but it was certainly not enough. The rise of the new group was equivalent to expanding the influence of Emperor Dong's palace in Zhongzhou State. The chaos in East Island gave Li Tianlan the right to intervene in East Island. The Snowdance Corps in his hands could target Snow Country with Wulan State as the center. Was that enough? Not enough, far from enough. With Li Tianlan's current status and combat capability in the Dark World, he was fully qualified to ask for more things. Europe, America, and more places. As long as Li Tianlan was still there, Emperor Dong's palace would sooner or later extend to every corner of the world, just like the Wang family of Beihai in its peak. Although Li Tianlan was entangled by a lot of things now, he was obviously already thinking about it. And because of the relationship between the Dark Knights and Emperor Dong's palace, it was also a very reasonable choice for Li Tianlan to intervene in the affairs of Europe next. Wang Xianxia thought for a moment and made a clear statement. I'll go back and arrange it. Then you, she didn't finish her words. Li Tianlan interrupted her directly. Stay a little longer, Li Tianlan said slowly. His tone was very calm, very natural, very calm, and yet it was not to be resisted. Wang Yuexiang's heart sank slightly for no reason. Li Tianlan's meaning was hard to guess, but his attitude was extremely obvious. He didn't want her to leave Emperor Dong's palace now. Under that seemingly peaceful attitude, there was an invisible toughness. She came to say goodbye to Li Tianlan. And Li Tianlan's answer was no. It could be said to be an order, or even an extremely tough request. Wang Yuexiang narrowed her eyes and looked at Li Tianlan. She said word by word, "Your Majesty, are you going to imprison me here?" "You're exaggerating." Li Tianlan shook his head and said in a calm voice. Wang Yuexiang then realized that although the two seemed to be strolling, she was the only one who really stepped forward from beginning to end. And Li Tianlan, who was beside her, didn't move forward at all. Every time he moved forward, he was in a state of flickering on the spot. As the two moved forward, she was constantly changing places with her sword energy. Obviously, Li Tianlan seemed to have made some slight breakthroughs in swordsmanship tonight, and he was silently adapting to his strength after the breakthrough. In this state, Li Tianlan didn't need to take a step at all. His body could appear in any corner of Emperor Dong's palace at any time, and he could also disappear in any corner of Emperor Dong's palace at will. Like a ghost. Or like a god. Everywhere. Wang Yuexiang's eyes became more and more solemn. "I don't know if you found it, but I can tell you clearly." Li Tianlan's figure slowly moved forward in flickering again and again. "The world has changed. Although I don't know what has changed, it has changed. Until tonight, I began to seriously think about a problem that I ignored before. Or rather, I'm not neglecting anything, but in the spiritual realm, I'm subconsciously being guided to not think about certain things. But the world has changed. In the spiritual domain, my guidance is no longer effective." He turned his head and looked at Wang Yuexiang, whose body was quietly tense. "I need an answer." "What answer?" Wang Yuexiang's body was extremely tense. "You are flaming fire." Li Tianlan said, "Before Snow Country, the master of Samsara Palace and the commander of Dark Knights in my impression were lovers. And you and the commander of Dark Knights were lovers. So for a long time, the master of Samsara Palace I knew should be you, right?" Wang Yuexiang didn't speak or even breathe. "At some time, in a certain period, you were the master of Samsara Palace, or in other words, the substitute of the master of Samsara Palace. I saw you in Snow Country. You little palace master, all three of you were there. At that time, you were you. And the palace master was also the palace master. Her aura was very strong. She was at the peak of the invincible realm. So at that time, you were you, and the palace master was the palace master. From that time on, my understanding of the master of Samsara Palace had already been wrong. But I didn't know your strength, so I didn't find it. After the Eternal Sword in Mormons, I knew your strength and your relationship with the Dark Knights. But I don't know why I didn't think about it. Until today, until just now, I didn't think about it. You are the master of Samsara Palace I knew before. There is no doubt about it." Li Tianlan looked at flaming fire with calm and deep eyes. "Then who is the master of Samsara Palace in Mormons who controlled the Eternal Sword to severely injure Wang Tianzong and cause his death?" Wang Yuexiang stopped. Her body was stiff on the spot. She didn't breathe or answer. There was dead silence around. Li Tianlan waited for a while and suddenly laughed. "It seems that this question is hard to answer, right?" Wang Yuexiang was still silent. "It doesn't matter," Li Tianlan said blandly. "You can take your time to think about it here. Tell me when you figure it out." Chapter 1190. Wang Yuexiang lowered her head. From an angle that Li Tianlan couldn't see, her face was a little pale. Li Tianlan asked a question that she couldn't answer at all. She was the master of Samsara Palace that Li Tianlan once knew. Who was the real master of Samsara Palace? Why could she give up everything for Li Tianlan and even give everything of Samsara Palace to Emperor Dong's palace? The Eternal Sword over Mormons was so gorgeous and hasty. What kind of feelings did the meteor-like light have when it pierced Wang Tianzong's chest? Li Tianlan had never thought about this question before. His mind was very clear most of the time, but when it came to this question, his mind would always deviate unconsciously. This question was like a blind spot hidden in the deepest part of his mind. He rarely touched it. Even if he touched it occasionally, he would pass it quietly. Until the final battle in Beihai, when Xianxia stood in front of him as Flaming Fire and the Queen of Darkness, Li Tianlan didn't think about this question. It wasn't until the sword energy swept through the world tonight that he clearly felt the beginning of the change of the world. His mind suddenly became completely clear. The question that he hadn't thought about for more than 2 years suddenly became extremely clear and brought great doubts. Who was the fallen master of Samsara Palace? How important this question was, Li Tianlan couldn't explain it in a short time. He was very sure that if he had left the border and gone to Huading, without seeing Qin Weibai or contacting Samsara Palace, his life would have been different. His growth might still be fast. He could get the support of a small part of the Li family's power. But he couldn't fight against Li Guangtu's purgatory of Heaven Capital. Without Samsara Palace, there were only 2 directions left in his life. The first was to seek refuge in the Wang family of Beihai and marry Wang Yuetong. The second was to return to the giant group and marry Dongqing Rushi. From Li Tianlan's personal point of view, neither of the 2 choices was a good choice. They were the directions of compromise under helplessness and the directions outside of Li Honghe's plan. Li Honghe's plan was to let him take over the purgatory of Heaven Capital as he grew up. But the old man obviously underestimated Li Guangtu's ability to control the purgatory of Heaven Capital. Therefore, without the Samsara Palace, everything that Li Tianlan faced would be very difficult. The Samsara Palace gave him a third choice. This mysterious force, even after its destruction, had been of great help to Li Tianlan from the beginning. The man Qin Weibai chose. With this identity alone, he began to contact various forces in Zhongzhou state with a relatively detached identity and was qualified to negotiate with the Southeast, the Giant Group, and even the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. He didn't need to join the Wang family of Beihai, return to the Giant Group, or start his life with difficulty under the rules of these 2 superpowers. He didn't join any force, but the Samsara Palace had been his help from the beginning to the end. His growth was in perfect sync with the plan of the Samsara Palace. The eve of the decisive battle of the Snow Empire was an extremely sensitive time. At that time, Li Tianlan had grown to a strong enough level. He defeated Wang Xingxiao, Gu Hanshan, Jiang Shangyu, and others in the joint maneuver of the Sky Academy and the Deep Sea Academy. He almost single-handedly suppressed all the young experts in Zhongzhou state and became the number 1 among the young generation in Zhongzhou state. His strength at that time was completely beyond his age. Although he was young at that time, the strength of the invincible realm could already stand at the top of the dark world and look down on most people. At that time, the Li family was ready to make trouble. Li Honghe left the border. The Li family's strongest base camp, Xianxia, began to return. The connection between Li Tianlan and the Giant Group was further deepened. The East Emperor Palace also had the most basic framework. As the youngest invincible realm expert in the Dark World, Li Tianlan was nominated by Wang Tianzong to become the youngest marshal in Zhongzhou state and the commander of the Snowdance Corps. He rose to the sky in one step and shone brightly. At that time, everyone knew Li Tianlan's future. But there were not many big shots who were really optimistic about the East Emperor Palace. To some extent, it was because of Li Tianlan's position. To put it more clearly, it was all because of the existence of the Samsara Palace. The Samsara Palace brought great help to Li Tianlan's personal development in the early stage, but it also brought a lot of resistance to the East Emperor Palace at that time. Li Tianlan could become the youngest marshal in Zhongzhou state at that time. But if the East Emperor Palace wanted to get a chance for rapid development, it depended on the choice of the Samsara Palace. This was pure wisdom, not influenced by personal feelings. Even Dongqing Wudi, who was loyal to Li Tianlan, and even Li Honghe at that time, could see and acquiesce to this. Zhongzhou state was waiting for the Samsara Palace's choice. Waiting for the further deepening of the cooperation between the Samsara Palace and Zhongzhou state. At that time, Li Tianlan was too young, and he didn't even know all this in hindsight. The Samsara Palace, which had become an obstacle to the development of the East Emperor Palace, had no choice. The chaos in Snow Country was vigorous. Mormon's eternal sword was unforgettable. The Samsara Palace completely became history, and all the shadows of that era fell at the same time. In the glory of the new era, Li Tianlan, who already had the strength to stand at the top of the Dark World, directly went to the peak. The East Emperor Palace began to develop rapidly in Tianan. Just like what Li Tianlan once said, after the chaos in Snow Country, no one was qualified to let him focus on the overall situation. Because he was the overall situation. The 2 years in the desert were a crucial accumulation and precipitation of his personal martial arts and strength, as well as the precipitation of his personal heart. His thinking was transforming. His sword Tao was improving with every passing moment. In more than 2 years, he left the desert prison. Although he had not really entered the invincible realm, he was already truly invincible in the world. Sidutangye, known as the hidden god of Xianxia state, joined the East Emperor Palace with Sai City. Saint, who was once known as the first supermaster of the Samsara Palace, also joined the East Emperor Palace. The East Emperor Palace became Emperor Dong's palace. What brought the greatest shock to the outside world was not the 2 deputy palace masters of the invincible realm. It was the Flourishing Age Fund that also merged into Emperor Dong's palace. It was the only true top neutral wealthy family in Xianxia state. The Flourishing Age Fund was comparable to any super consortium in the world. Han Donglu, who was like a legend in the financial world. Military counselor of the Samsara Palace. In a sense, his joining was even more shocking than Saint and Sidutsangye joining Emperor Dong's palace. Military counselor was not in the invincible realm. In terms of combat capability, he naturally could not compare with the 2 deputy palace masters of the invincible realm. But the addition of the Flourishing Age Fund made up for the shortcomings of Emperor Dong's palace. They were all shortcomings. Money, human resources, intelligence channels, and even talent echelons, the Flourishing Age Fund had everything that should and should not have. What would Emperor Dong's palace be like without the Flourishing Age Fund? It was a regional force with absolute powerful combat capability. In the entire Dark World, it was probably a first-class force, and it was a regional one. But what would Emperor Dong's palace be like with the Flourishing Age Fund? With the Flourishing Age Fund, Emperor Dong's palace instantly became a super force that could compare with Rothschild in terms of wealth, the 6 groups of Xianxia state in terms of human resources, the Wang family of Beihai in terms of experts, and the Jiang family of South America in terms of intelligence. Now, everyone could say that the foundation of Emperor Dong's palace was slightly insufficient, but no one dared to say that the foundation of Emperor Dong's palace was not stable enough, and no one dared to say that Emperor Dong's palace was not strong enough. Such a Emperor Dong's palace was a real supergiant in the current Dark World. No, even in the previous era. As long as Li Tianlan was given time, he could completely build a unique dynasty in the Dark World. And the foundation of Emperor Dong's palace was built on the bones of the Samsara Palace. How could such a Samsara Palace and such a palace master not be important to Li Tianlan? Li Tianlan didn't even know who she was now. He was sure that there was a huge secret hidden in this matter that he didn't know, but he didn't know what it was. But Mochizuki-san knew. You've been running away from something. Li Tianlan's voice was calm. Since I brought you back, you rarely go out of your room, and you even need someone to send you 3 meals a day. You may not be familiar with most of the people here, but there are always people you are familiar with, or even very familiar with. Deputy Palace Master Saint is now in Xianyuan City. The Chief Administrative Counselor was also here before he went to Yuzhou. Horsewoman is also here. You are all former super masters of the Samsara Palace, but you act as if you don't know them at all. Are you running away from me? Or are you running away from them? I don't like them. Mochizuki's song finally spoke in a low and hoarse voice. Li Tianlan smiled casually. That can be a reason. What about Little Bai? Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and looked at Mochizuki's song. You used to be with Little Bai for 7 years, and you were almost inseparable. Little Bai also told me before that in her heart, You are not only a bodyguard, but also a friend, or even a best friend. Before Little Bai went to Yuzhou, you didn't see each other either. But Mochizuki Song suddenly raised her head and stared at Li Tianlan. There were countless emotions in her eyes. Some were angry, some were mocking, some were in a trance, and even a trace of hatred. Finally, it turned into an extremely miserable grievance. Li Tianlan was stunned. Mochizuki Song lowered her head again and said nothing. Tell me. The extremely complicated expression reappeared crazily in Li Tianlan's mind. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. Who is the master of Samsara Palace? Why don't you ask her? Mochizuki Song gritted her teeth. Ask my former boss? Li Tianlan paused and said nothing. He just looked at Mochizuki Song and narrowed his eyes. What? Mochizuki Song sneered. You don't want to embarrass her, so you come to bully me? I didn't expect this to come out of your mouth. Blame? It seems that the relationship between you two is not that good. Li Tianlan said slowly. Mochizuki Song gritted her teeth and looked up at Li Tianlan. You idiot. I want an answer. Li Tianlan said quietly. I'm free. That's what my boss told me at that time. I didn't join Emperor Dong's palace, and I'm not obliged to answer your question. I'm free. Mochizuki Song gritted her teeth and said coldly. Really? Li Tianlan asked indifferently. Mochizuki Song paused slightly and said in a low voice, I want to go back to Europe. Stay here. Li Tianlan's voice was flat. Stay for a while, or tell me the answer. Your Majesty seems determined to imprison me? Mochizuki Song sneered. Whatever you think. Li Tianlan said indifferently. What if I have to go? Mochizuki Song stared at Li Tianlan and suddenly said seriously. You can't go. Li Tianlan shook his head. And where can you go? It's just a simple question. All I need is an answer. Are you willing to give up the dark nights for this answer? Mochizuki Song looked at Li Tianlan coldly, and her eyes became more and more aggrieved. Tell me when you've made up your mind. Then you'll be truly free. Li Tianlan's figure slowly disappeared in the night. Mochizuki Song stood where she was and looked at the place where Li Tianlan's figure disappeared. She was silent for a long time. Answer? Of course, she knew the answer. But she couldn't imagine what would happen if Li Tianlan knew the so-called answer. She didn't know if Li Tianlan could bear that kind of blow. The night wind blew past her. Mochizuki Song subconsciously tightened her clothes and said nothing. Chapter 1191. The office on the 5th floor of the castle was brightly lit. Xiao Mahai wrote the last name on the document in front of him, then quietly looked at the handwriting on the document, frowning in thought. As the supervisor of Emperor Dong's palace appointed by Li Tianlan, he was once a general of the desert prison in Zhongzhou State. He was seriously injured and dying in the bloody battle in the desert. His martial arts were almost destroyed by Gu Qianchuan. But like Moongaze and Song, because of Xinyuan Wushang's existence, Xiao Mahai's injury recovered extremely fast. Not only did his injury recover, but his body also recovered a certain degree of vitality when receiving treatment. His strength that was close to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm recovered, and he even had the hope to set foot in the half-step invincible realm in his lifetime. It was definitely a blessing in disguise. For this general who had served him for 2 years under great pressure and countless ridicule, Li Tianlan gave him almost absolute trust. Xiao Mahai expressed his attitude toward Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan also expressed his attitude toward Xiao Mahai. As soon as Xiao Mahai's family was brought to Xinyuan City, Li Tianlan had already arranged a place for him. He was the chief seneschal of Emperor Dong's palace and also the second chief executive of Emperor Dong's palace. If the chief executive's power was limited to the internal affairs of Emperor Dong's palace, then the second chief executive's power was enough to cover all the properties of Emperor Dong's palace. He could be said to be the absolute core of the palace. The first chief administrative officer of Emperor Dong's palace was the military counselor. There were 2 deputy administrators. One of them was Xiao Mahai, and the other was the chief administrator of Xinyuan City. He was also the first candidate to succeed Ning Qianqing as the mayor of Xinyuan City in the future. He was just a nominal member of Emperor Dong's palace, and his role was to establish the position of Emperor Dong's palace in Tiannan. So, strictly speaking, Li Tianlan was the only second chief executive in the real sense. The development of Emperor Dong's palace was very short. During the period of development, the internal hierarchy was not obvious. This could improve the cohesion of Emperor Dong's palace to a certain extent, but it was also easy to cause chaos. Li Tianlan was the palace master, chief administrative officer, military advisor, saint, hidden deity, and Li Shi were the three deputy palace masters. This was a clear hierarchy. Further down, the positions of Li Baitian and the others were a little blurry. As the mayor of Xianyuan City, Ning Qianqing's position in Emperor Dong's palace was also very subtle. Li Tianlan couldn't do anything about it. After he returned to Emperor Dong's palace, he intentionally or unintentionally avoided the main personnel framework of Emperor Dong's palace at this stage. Except for the appointment of several deputy palace masters and military counselor, the most important appointment was the appointment of Xiao Mahai. No matter what Li Tianlan meant to the outside world by putting Xiao Mahai in an important position, at least it was obvious that he attached great importance to the general director. Therefore, Xiao Mahai, who began to adapt to his new position as soon as he recovered from his injury, adapted very well. He handled the internal affairs of Emperor Dong's palace in an orderly manner, and he also did a good job in assisting the military counselor in dealing with external affairs. While everyone in Emperor Dong's palace was discussing the abnormal phenomena that day, Xiao Mahai was the only one who locked himself in his office and dealt with his work. Blue moon? He didn't see it at all. What really caught his attention was the list of forms in front of him, as well as a list that was constantly being drafted, deleted, and added. The name list was gradually perfected after constant editing. Xiao Mahai stretched, walked to the water dispenser, and poured a glass of water, intending to wrap up today's work. Li Tianlan's figure appeared in his sight at the moment he turned around. Xiao Mahai's palm trembled slightly. After seeing who it was, he breathed a sigh of relief and said with a smile, "Your Majesty, good evening." Li Tianlan casually responded with a hum. He leaned his body and pressed his fingers on the form and list that Xiao Mahai put on the table. "What's this?" "Some aid materials." Xiao Mahai was busy making tea for Li Tianlan, handing him a cigarette and attentively lighting it for him. Compared with the servile attitude when they first met, Director Xiao now got along with Li Tianlan much more naturally and sincerely. Li Tianlan nodded as if he didn't care about it at all. Aid materials. There was a series of densely packed materials on the list. Food, clothes, tents, various instruments, mechanical equipment, and so on. There were a lot of materials, and the quantity of each kind was also very high. In addition, there was a batch of monetary aid. The long list of numbers looked beautiful under the light. 600 million. Li Tianlan blinked. Some of the things that were just drawn up today may be added. I need to discuss it with the chief administrative officer tomorrow. Xiao Mahai whispered. Li Tianlan asked and then gave his own answer. South America? Your Majesty is wise. Xiao Mahai nodded with a smile. The natural disaster in South America was very sudden. It is said that there was a large-scale aftershock not long ago, and the matter is very serious. According to experts, this super earthquake in South America can even affect the global continental plate in the next few decades. South America is now full of suffering. As a superpower in the dark world, it is our responsibility to help South America. At present, this is only the first batch of aid materials. According to the situation, we may need to invest more manpower, financial resources, and material resources to help South America rebuild after the disaster. What a pair of good eggs. Li Tianlan laughed. Xiao Mahai said that the superpowers in the dark world were like charities, but in fact, if there was no purpose, the so-called disaster relief and aid had nothing to do with the dark world. A force like Emperor Dong's palace, which had close ties with a superpower, might help, but it was only in response to a call. Now, Zhongzhou State had not communicated with Emperor Dong's palace about this matter, but Emperor Dong's palace had come up with a plan to help, which was very telling. Of course, the aid was real. the amount of aid they received would only increase. But the main reason wasn't any assistance at all. You want to take advantage of this? Will they march into South America? Li Tianlan asked. Xiao Mahai nodded. I had a brief communication with the military counselor and reached a consensus on this point. Your Majesty, South America is very weak now, and this weakness is multifaceted. Their sense of existence has never been too strong internationally, but in the dark world, South America has always been an area that everyone attaches great importance to. The situation there is complicated, and it is relatively chaotic in all aspects. It has always been the ideal base camp for many superpowers, not only because it is relatively easy to take root there, but also because they can take advantage of the chaotic and delicate situation there to get greater benefits. The Heroes Club and the Jiang family of South America have always been the giants in the dark world of South America. After the chaos in Snow Country, the leader of the fantasy world died, and the leaderless fantasy world began to try to develop in South America. In addition, there are a large number of small forces that are not popular in the whole dark world but are very influential in the local area. They take root there. For them, every chaos there is equivalent to a feast. Arms, drugs, smuggling, gold, jewelry, antiques. As long as you have strength, there are benefits everywhere. Your Majesty, we can take advantage of this opportunity to enter America in the name of aid and expand with Godibia as the center. This super earthquake is an unimaginable disaster for Godibia, but it's an unimaginable opportunity for us. And it's not just a super earthquake. I've confirmed the information from all sides. After the final battle in Beihai, although the Dark World still has extremely powerful forces, such forces are too scattered, and there is no clear point of concentration. There are not many second-class forces that can be called, and a considerable number of them were buried in the final battle in Beihai. Now, not only America, but the whole Dark World is in an unprecedented state of emptiness. Xiao Mahai's eyes were a little fiery. Your Majesty, you know what this means. America is just a starting point. We are qualified to fight for more things. Of course, Li Tianlan could understand what this meant. In the next few years, the entire Emperor Dong's palace would enter a stage of unimaginable crazy expansion. It was not an exaggeration to describe it as unimaginable and crazy. The development path of Emperor Dong's palace was the same as Li Tianlan's growth speed. They were both explosive. Li Tianlan's foundation was now in Zhongzhou state, and he had absorbed the Samsara Palace. Why hadn't the Samsara Palace been regarded as a superpower in the Dark World before? Even if they had experts at the peak of the Invincible Realm, murderous weapons, and the famous 12 Supermasters, they were still first-class forces. The most important reason was that Samsara Palace did not have a stable foundation. Their strength was undeniable, but without a foundation to develop freely, it inevitably gave people a feeling of instability. What was missing after Emperor Dong's palace merged with Samsara Palace? Without the master of Samsara Palace at the peak of the Invincible Realm, but there was Li Tianlan. Without Fire Flaming, the Invincible Realm expert. But there were 3 more deputy palace masters of the Invincible Realm. A few heavenly masters at the peak of the Thundershocking Realm were missing. But there were also young experts such as Li Baitian, Bai Yuming, Su Chu, and Du Hanyin, as well as several top assassins of Sai City, such as Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud. What else was missing? Perhaps there was still something missing. But now in Emperor Dong's palace. They now had a new foundation that they could develop freely and could be supported by a new group and a large amount of wealth. What kind of Emperor Dong's palace was this? The invincible Dong Huang. Li Shi, the deputy palace master at the peak of the Invincible Realm. The deputy palace master who was close to the peak of the Invincible Realm, the hidden god of Zhongzhou State, Sidu Tangyu. The deputy palace master of the Invincible Realm was Saint. In the field of wealth, he could be said to be the chief administrative military advisor. Bai Yuming of the half-step Invincible Realm. His combat capability was no less than that of Lin Yuxian and Li Baitian, who were at the top of the half-step Invincible Realm. He was the top assassin in the Dark World, Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud. There were too many people who could be named. The core power of Emperor Dong's palace was powerful enough to make most people despair in the dark world. The rise of the new group was unstoppable. Outside Zhongzhou State, the current patriarch of the Lin clan was Li Tianlan's woman. The Dark Knights were also allies of Emperor Dong's palace. The Flourishing Age Fund also provided Emperor Dong's palace with massive wealth and connections. In this state, Emperor Dong's palace did not have to think about anything else. He had power, money, and talent. The only thing that Emperor Dong's palace needed to do now was to expand. It could even be said to be brainless expansion, because he didn't need to worry about anything. The only task of Emperor Dong's palace was to spread the influence of Emperor Dong's palace to the entire dark world in the name of Li Tianlan. But now, they were facing a broken world of darkness. America, Europe, Snow Country, East Island, Tianan. There were opportunities everywhere. Both had excellent opportunities. Then do it. There was nothing to worry about. Your Majesty, about a few hours ago, I received a call from Lin Bujing. Xiao Mahai thought for a moment and continued to speak. Lin Bujing? Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. He was not familiar with the name, but he was definitely not a stranger. Qin Weibai had mentioned the name to him. And those who knew the Lin clan also knew the name. This was the patriarch of the largest branch of the Lin clan in South America. He could be regarded as a top figure in all of America. The name Lin Bujing could almost be regarded as a world-class wealthy family. It had been rooted in America for nearly 200 years. It had spread its branches and was very involved in a wide range of fields. Jewelry, minerals, energy, tobacco, football, arms, gold, rubber, aerospace, banking. It was in all fields in South America. Lin Bujing's shadow. Even in the entire Lin clan, he was a super heavyweight branch patriarch. He is one of the core figures of the Lin clan and a friend of Mr. Lin Fengting. Xiao Mahai chuckled and said, in fact, on the day of the decisive battle in Beihai, Lin Bujing contacted the elites of the Men in Black, Fantasy World, the Heroes Club, and several other forces. They rushed into the headquarters of the Jiang family of South America and destroyed 6 secret bases of the Jiang family of South America in one day. At the same time, more than 80% of the core members of the Jiang family of South America were wiped out. Now in South America, there are not only natural disasters but also man-made disasters. It's very lively. Lin Bujing hopes to cooperate with Emperor Dong's palace. He sincerely invites us to march into South America and hopes that Your Majesty can visit South America when you have time. Now they have parted ways with the Heroes Club and several other forces. But according to the prior agreement, Lin Bujing will not infringe on the interests of the Heroes Club, the Men in Black, and other forces. Xiao Mahai's voice was somewhat meaningful. Li Tianlan's heart skipped a beat and he whispered, he hopes that we can help him deal with the Heroes Club and the Men in Black? We have no reason to refuse. Xiao Mahai said with a smile. Old fox. Li Tianlan laughed and scolded. He said it was cooperation, but in fact, he wants us to clean up the mess for him? If it can be cleaned up, it won't be a mess. Xiao Mahai smiled and lowered his head to look at the list on the table. Li Tianlan was also looking down at the list. His eyes fell on a name at the top of the list and he narrowed his eyes. There were about a dozen names on the list, but they had been deleted, changed, and constantly smeared, almost covering the whole piece of paper. But all the changes were concentrated on the names in the middle area. The names at the top and the names at the bottom had not been changed from beginning to end. The name listed alone at the top was undoubtedly the most suitable candidate in Xiao Mahai's mind to represent Emperor Dong's palace to develop its foundation in South America. This was the first time that Emperor Dong's palace had expanded to a distant place. This person could undoubtedly be regarded as the commander of this expansion. If he could gain a foothold in South America, from the perspective of Emperor Dong's palace, he could be said to be a vassal of Emperor Dong's palace and a high-ranking official of border provinces. Emperor Dong's palace currently ranked 3rd, but he was the most powerful deputy palace master. This was Xiao Mahai's choice. He hoped that Li Shi could lead the team to America and become the stabilizing force of Emperor Dong's palace's expansion in America. She has just come to Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan knocked on the table. I know. Xiao Mahai nodded with a smile. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows slightly. You know. Xiao Mahai's smile was very subtle. Li Tianlan also smiled and said calmly, "What are you worried about?" "I'm not worried, Your Majesty." Xiao Mahai said softly, "I'm just trying to avoid accidents to the greatest extent. In any form, any accidents that may be bad for Emperor Dong's palace are my job." There is no doubt about the strength of Deputy Palace Master Li Shi. The situation in America is complicated. The Heroes Club, Fantasy World, and even the remaining power of the Jiang family of South America. Although these forces have no leader, the foundation of the super forces should not be underestimated. Lin Bujing's initiative to cooperate with us is also a very good start. Under such circumstances, we should have a meticulous and powerful person over there who can suppress all the forces. Considering all the conditions, Deputy Palace Master Li Shi is the most suitable one. He is in America. For America and here, it is the most responsible way to avoid accidents. Li Tianlan did not speak. Xiao Mahai gritted his teeth and simply continued, "Not only Deputy Palace Master Li Shi, but also Deputy Palace Master Situ. If necessary, it is also a good choice for Deputy Palace Master Situ to go to Europe. Your Majesty, we have a good relationship with the Dark Knights. Europe is much more lively than America. If we expand to Europe, Deputy Palace Master Situ will certainly contribute a lot. Why not Li Shi go to Europe, but Hidden God go to America?" Li Tianlan smiled faintly. Deputy Palace Master Li Shi is a little stronger. Xiao Mahai's voice was soft and slow. Although the situation in Europe is more complicated, we have natural allies there. The Dark Knights will help us a lot. In South America, Mr. Lin Fengting will not always be in South America. Although the strength of the Lin clan in South America is very strong, they now have no invincible realm experts. Good reason, Li Tianlan said flatly. Xiao Mahai fell silent and just stared at the list on the table in front of him. This list could be said to be quite interesting. Xiao Mahai was already considering Situ Zhangyue, but after all, he had not yet carried it out. In the list that he had begun to draw up to America, Li Shi was the leader, and Xiao Mahai assigned her as his deputy, Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud. Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud of Sai City. Li Tianlan shook his head slightly. It's too deliberate. The list needs to continue to be changed. It's all up to Your Majesty. Xiao Mahai's smile was meticulous. In fact, both of them were very clear about the real intention of arranging Li Shi to America and even Situ Zhangyue to Europe. Although Li Tianlan felt that it was not necessary, he would not completely deny his butler's suggestion. He picked up the list and put it aside, saying flatly, "Li Kuangtu will not stay here for too long." Li Kuangtu had become his prisoner. As a prisoner, after he was brought to Xinyuan City from Nanyun by Li Tianlan, he had fallen into a deep coma because of serious injuries. Li Tianlan kept Li Kuangtu here, and he also stayed here. When Xinyuan Wushang rushed back, Li Tianlan was ready to seriously solve the problem between him and the purgatory of Heaven Capital. When Li Kuangtu was still in Emperor Dong's palace, he sent Li Shi and Situ Zhangyue to other places. From Xiao Mahai's point of view, it was to prevent accidents. From Li Tianlan's point of view, this matter was actually not a bad thing. Xiao Mahai smiled and whispered, "Your Majesty is wise." Chapter 1192. Li Tianlan looked at the list in front of him again, shook his head, and said nothing. If every leader of a superpower had to work hard day and night, then the current Li Tianlan was undoubtedly not qualified to do so. The previous master of Samsara Palace was also unqualified. In the past, military counselor was in charge of a series of things in Samsara Palace: how to develop, intelligence, various industries, and all aspects of contacts. Now, as the chief administrative officer of Emperor Dong's palace, military counselor's position in Emperor Dong's palace was even greater than when he was in Samsara Palace. His power was even greater than that of the 3 deputy palace lords of Emperor Dong's palace whose division of labor was unclear. Outside of martial arts, Li Tianlan had always been a relatively lazy person. He was also ambitious, but he had no ambition at the same time. A few years ago, when he entered Huading from the border of Zhongzhou state, his ambition and desire were growing every minute and second. But in essence, what he desired was not the power that could overturn the court and the opposition, nor the wealth that could rival a country. What he desired was to let the Li family return to the peak of Zhongzhou state. Power. He had enough power now. The rise of the new group was constantly impacting the pattern of Zhongzhou state. After the election in 10 months, under the new situation of Zhongzhou state, Li Tianlan could definitely be regarded as one of the most powerful people in Zhongzhou state. The wealth of the Flourishing Age Fund was in the trillions, and it had the most terrifying cash flow. There were countless other industries hidden under the water. To some extent, the industry of the Flourishing Age Fund was a miracle of wealth created by Qin Weibai using spacetime. From the moment Qin Weibai came to this world, it was no longer a question of whether she could grasp the future or not. No one could see through the future, but she could see through it. No one could know the future. She was completely clear that in this case, if she wanted to accumulate wealth, it would be as easy as taking something out of her pocket. In the past 2 decades, the Flourishing Age Fund had footprints in various emerging profiteering industries all over the world. It was used to the extreme during the financial crisis, and the Flourishing Age Fund grew rapidly. In the financial crisis, it began to annex physical industries and buy shares of various multinational groups. Its wealth was increasing. Military counselor once gave Li Tianlan a document, which detailed the industries that the Flourishing Age Fund really controlled and the cash that could be mobilized in the shortest time. How many industries did the Flourishing Age Fund actually control? The dark world was still not completely clear. But the form was extremely clear, listing the current assets of the Flourishing Age Fund in detail. For example, the Ofi Oil Group had deep cooperation with Zhongzhou State 6 years ago. This international giant signed a 20-year oil agreement with Zhongzhou State 6 years ago would provide Zhongzhou State with 60 million tons of oil every year. This 20-year agreement had a transaction value of as high as trillions of Zhongzhou State. The Flourishing Age Fund had begun to attack Offutt Petroleum Group as early as 10 years ago. Now, it had quietly occupied 23% of Offutt Petroleum Group's shares. The Flourishing Age Fund began to attack Ofi Oil Group as early as 10 years ago, and had and occupied a 23. And occupied. Tianan, and there were many and in of. The detailed information given to Li Tianlan by military counselor had nearly 1,000 pages and millions of words. Li Tianlan still kept the information in the drawer. He didn't even bother to count the zeros on the first page of the information about how many companies the Flourishing Age Fund controlled, not to mention how many companies the Flourishing Age Fund controlled. He only knew that it was an astronomical figure that he could squander at will, even in several lifetimes. When wealth reached that level, it really became a simple number. Li Tianlan didn't care about these things at all. In his more than 20 years of life, his only obsession was to let the Li family stand on the highest stage of Zhongzhou State again. But which Li family was the so-called Li family? The purgatory of heaven capital? Or the Emperor Dong's palace today? With the death of Li Honghe, Li Tianlan and Li Guangtu each represented a part of the Li family. They were both the so-called orthodox, but neither of them was orthodox. He was pushed to the present position and had the qualification to look down on the heroes in the world. But looking back on his more than 20 years of life, Li Tianlan's heart was full of confusion. He couldn't find the meaning of life. Invincible in the world, powerful in the court and commoners, rich as a country. All of this looked beautiful. But it just looked beautiful. What was the point of all of this? He was too lazy to intervene in the decision-making of the high-level officials of Emperor Dong's palace and the future development of Emperor Dong's palace. The world was changing, and opportunities appeared in front of him one after another. They were at his fingertips, and he seemed to have reached the peak. In this world, opportunities were everywhere. He just quietly watched Emperor Dong's palace continue to develop and grow stronger. There was not the slightest bit of complacency in his heart. Occasionally, a trace of loss and loneliness flashed through his heart. Whatever. Li Tianlan knocked on the list in front of him again. Pay attention to the method. Xiao Mahai nodded silently. What's the matter with my room? Li Tianlan suddenly asked. This was the reason why he came to Xiao Mahai. After returning here, Li Tianlan didn't have time to go to his room to rest. But now the whole Emperor Dong's palace was under his perception. In other words, as long as he wanted, no matter where he was, in the area covered by his sword energy, he could see every corner and appear anywhere. Under such circumstances, it could be said that he had a clear view of the situation in his room. I hope your majesty will like it. Shemerhai smiled. Li Tianlan's eyes were a little strange, and so was his voice. Do you really think that little Bai has a good temper? Aren't you afraid that she will punish you? I'm just doing what your majesty wants. Xiao Mahai said righteously, and with your majesty's current identity, it's normal to have a servant of the half-step invincible realm. Li Tianlan twitched the corner of his mouth. A servant of the half-step invincible realm was really rare. A servant close to the top of the half-step invincible realm was even rarer. And a servant whose body, temperament, and appearance were close to the top, and whose strength was close to the top of the half-step invincible realm, was simply a treasure. For example, the one in Li Tianlan's room. She was a bit outrageous. The small white suspenders completely exposed her slender neck and snow-white shoulders. The snow-white pride on her chest was clearly outlined, and the looming deep ravine looked mysterious and tempting. The suspenders were very short, and her slender, white, and tender waist was completely exposed to Li Tianlan's perception. She wore a white miniskirt, and the black stockings showed her extremely soft and beautiful curves. The silver-white glittering high-heeled shoes had very high heels, so every time she bent down, the extent was higher than normal, so that Li Tianlan could even clearly see the translucent gauze in his perception. She was more than 1.6 meters tall, not tall, but extremely well-proportioned and slender. Her long hair reached her waist, and her face was cold, arrogant, and enchanting. It was a kind of seductive temperament that emanated from her bones. At this time, she was standing quietly in front of the mirror, practicing her expressions in front of the mirror. Charming, shy, pitiful, stubborn, proud, reluctant, pure, coquettish, cold, different expressions, different temperaments. She was able to control each of them perfectly. Li Tianlan couldn't describe this feeling for a moment. The other party's various changes were natural and real. If he had to describe it, just 2 words. Professional. No matter how she teased and seduced the opposite sex, the other party's every move seemed to have a kind of professionalism that she had received strict professional training. And this conclusion was drawn by Li Tianlan in the process of observation. If the other party didn't stand in front of the mirror and constantly change her state, then every state she showed was absolutely real. This servant is very professional. Li Tianlan glanced at Xiao Mahai. Xiao Mahai's expression slightly tightened, but he misunderstood Li Tianlan's meaning. He said as if to guarantee, Your Majesty, I have asked carefully. So far, she is still pure. No man with her previous identity, no one dared to force her. It is said that a prince has been pursuing her, but she didn't give him a chance. The current palace master of Liuhua Palace was also the only capable superior of the half-step invincible realm in East Island. My Shiranui. When Emperor Dong's palace swept the whole East Island on the night of the final battle in Beihai, my Shiranui detained Li Baidian and wanted to be Li Tianlan's woman. Li Tianlan said that he needed a maid. He didn't know what the other party was thinking. She couldn't help but agree to Li Tianlan's request, and she came so soon. Li Tianlan didn't care about a maid. But with such an exaggerated dress, the other party seemed to want to take off all her clothes and live in his room. Did you arrange those clothes? Li Tianlan looked at Xiao Mahai silently. My Shiranui had changed several sets of clothes in the room, and without exception, they were all extremely sexy and revealing clothes. Li Tianlan even found several uniforms, including those of a flight attendant, a nurse, a teacher, and an East Island military uniform. There was also a searcher and a student uniform that countless otakus couldn't help but have a variety of styles. Li Tianlan looked at Xiao Mahai with some pity in his eyes. If this was really arranged by Xiao Mahai, It would be strange if Qin Weibai didn't skin him alive when she came back. It was one thing for Qin Weibai to be generous, but it was another thing for others to be generous for her. What clothes? Xiao Mahai was stunned. I haven't had time to prepare clothes. He showed a knowing smile that all men understood. If your majesty has any special needs, I'll arrange it right away. In Li Tianlan's perception, Mai Shiranui gently licked the moist corners of her mouth, slightly raised her eyebrows, and her eyes were stubborn and proud. An indescribable charm rippled from her little by little. Li Tianlan was stunned and scolded with a smile, "Get out of here. If Little Bai hears this, you'll suffer in the future." Xiao Mahai scratched his head. Madame said that she would stay in Yuzhou for a few more days, and Mai Shiranui won't stay in Emperor Dong's palace for too long. This time she came back to make her attitude clear. She hasn't fully handled the internal affairs of Liuhua Palace. It is said that she has already planned to take action against Jifeng Sword Training School and Wuji Palace, so she hopes to report the situation to you alone. If possible, she hopes that your majesty can send some people to help. Xiao Mahai's voice paused, hesitated for a second, and continued, "Your majesty, this woman is ambitious and seems to be willing to pay. If we help her, Liuhua Palace will become the first power in East Island sooner or later." "There is no Liuhua Palace," Li Tianlan said blandly. "From now on, Liuhua Palace will become a branch of Emperor Dong's palace in East Island." Xiao Mahai nodded thoughtfully, and seemed to have begun to consider how much support to give to Liuhua Palace. Now the internal problems of Emperor Dong's palace were very complicated, and the most urgent problem to solve was to clarify the division of labor among the core personnel. Xiao Mahai was now the general director of Emperor Dong's palace. Before he came to Emperor Dong's palace, the person in charge of all the internal affairs of Emperor Dong's palace was an excellent graduate named Fairy Tail. Fairy Tail was a student of the Sky Academy in the same year as Li Tianlan and Li Beiyin. When she graduated, she was not famous. Her strength at the peak of the fire-flaming realm was not bad, but not too outstanding. After joining Emperor Dong's palace, she began to show her strength, and now she had vaguely touched the threshold of the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. Because of Xiao Mahai, Li Tianlan did not clarify Fairy Tail's duties after returning to Emperor Dong's palace. Until now, almost all of Fairy Tail's duties overlapped with Xiao Mahai's, and Xiao Mahai had the absolute leadership, so that Fairy Tail, who used to be a core member of Emperor Dong's palace, now seemed to be Xiao Mahai's assistant. Fairy Tail was very steady, meticulous, and had a strong sense of belonging to Emperor Dong's palace. So in the face of all this, she did not say much and was very cooperative with Xiao Mahai. But no problem did not mean no problem. There were more and more such things, and they became the most urgent thing to be solved. The most obvious overlap between Fairy Tail and Xiao Mahai was their work. Not to mention the two of them. Li Beiyin, Bai Yuming, Su Chu, Du Hanyin, and Yu Qinyan, who had been with Li Tianlan since the beginning, did not have any clear duties in Emperor Dong's palace. Now there was 1.5 corps that truly belonged to Emperor Dong's palace. That half was the Snowdance Corps, which had been stationed in the eastern part of Europe for several years. The other was the Nightmare Corps, which had always been in Tiannan. The internal structure of the Nightmare Corps, which had less than 2,000 people, had always been vague. It was divided into 4 brigades. The 4 captains were all in the Thunder-Shocking realm, and the 2 deputy captains were also in the Thunder-Shocking realm. In each brigade, there were 3 squadrons. Each squadron was divided into several detachments. Then there were the teams that were divided into groups. The leadership of the Nightmare Corps changed relatively frequently, but at least there was a relatively clear structure. The commander of the corps was Lin Yuxian, the former heir of the Lin clan. But the unclear ones were the high-level members. Strictly speaking, Li Beiyin and others were the high-level members of the Nightmare Corps, but they had no specific duties. They were very familiar with each other and had a very good friendship. In just 2 years, there were no problems. But as Emperor Dong's palace merged with Sai City, and Saint and military counselor joined Emperor Dong's palace, everything began to change. There was only one Nightmare Corps in Emperor Dong's palace. In other words, the Nightmare Corps was responsible for all the combat and guard tasks in Emperor Dong's palace. They needed to go out to fight, guard inside, and transport materials. All the tasks related to combatants were handled by the Nightmare Corps. Therefore, the new members of Emperor Dong's palace had to join the Nightmare Corps. It was worth noting that Situ Cangyue was different from Wei Kunlun. Situ Cangyue entered Emperor Dong's palace with the entire Sai city. However, Wei Kunlun did not represent Shu Mountain. From the moment he joined Emperor Dong's palace, he voluntarily gave up his identity as the eldest brother of Mount Shu and the Nirvana Sword Master of Mount Shu. He left the Nirvana Sword of Mount Shu and gave the power of Mount Shu to his second brother, Han Chongyang, and only joined Emperor Dong's palace with some of his trusted subordinates. But even so, Saint brought 4 superiors of the Thundershocking realm and hundreds of swordsmen to Emperor Dong's palace, one of whom was at the peak of the Thundershocking realm. The power of Mount Shu could be said to be full of confidence in Emperor Dong's palace. First of all, as the great Void Sword Master of Mount Shu, Li Beidan was a brother who grew up with Li Tianlan. Wei Kunlun was also the Vice Palace Lord. All of this was enough to make everyone in Mount Shu feel confident in Emperor Dong's palace. Other than the power of Shu Mountain, the other core power came from the Jade Pool. There were no superiors of the Invincible Realm in Jade Pool. But Bai Yuming, Su Chu, and Dongqing Rushi were all from Jade Pool, and even Ning Qianxing was one of the disciples of Jade Pool. Over the past 2 years, at least hundreds of young disciples of Jade Pool had joined Emperor Dong's palace under the influence of these people, and now they had become a core part of Emperor Dong's palace. The bloody battle in the desert had killed more than half of the elite forces of the Nightmare Legion, but the survivors had been promoted to more important positions, such as squad leader, branch leader, and even squadron leader. These graduates from the 2 academies were not from Jade Pool or Mount Shu, and had nothing to do with Sai City. As graduates of the same year, most of them were familiar with each other, and they formed a group completely spontaneously. Therefore, in Emperor Dong's palace, there was an academy faction formed by graduates from the 2 academies. The second was the least number but the most senior generation of the Li family. In more than 2 years, the Tianluo Hall in the Purgatory of Heaven capital gradually moved to Emperor Dong's palace. This agency, which used to be responsible for all the intelligence work in the Purgatory of Heaven capital, made up for the lack of intelligence in Emperor Dong's palace to a certain extent. After merging with the Flourishing Age Fund, it became more pervasive. In the Purgatory of Heaven capital, there were also some old people of the Li family who returned to Emperor Dong's palace after Li Honghe's death. Li Tianlan was the heir of the Li family appointed by Li Honghe himself, not Li Guangtu. This alone was enough to make some old people of the Li family choose to join Emperor Dong's palace. This group of people was the quietest. Most of them did not have specific duties and were relatively detached. After joining Emperor Dong's palace, these people gradually began to leave Tiannan one by one. It was not a betrayal, but they went to a more suitable place for them. This group of veterans of the Li family now had 2 ordinary figures in the outside world, and they were also recognized by the outside world as the backbone of the new group. Xianxia, the minister of the Ministry of Security of Zhongzhou State. Tianying, the deputy commander of the Snowdance Corps. Xianxia's ascension was the compromise of the academics during the internal shuffle between the Southeast Group and the Giant Group. Of course, this department, which had been firmly controlled by the Southeast Group, let Xianxia ascend, which also meant to sow discord. But anyway, in the past 2 years, Xianxia had completely gained a foothold in the Ministry of Security and then began to absorb the former veterans of the Li family one by one. Tianying was expected to be the person pushed by the Giant Group to compete for the position of commander of the Border Control Corps. But after many attempts, Dongqing Wudi finally transferred Tianying to the Snowdance Corps because the resistance was too great. Now the commander of the Snowdance Corps was Cheng Huaining, the commander of the Zhongzhou State Army Corps in Europe. After the election, Cheng Huaining would probably be transferred back to Zhongzhou State. It was almost a foregone conclusion that Tianying would become the commander of the Zhongzhou State Army Corps in Europe. The candidate for the commander of the Snowdance Corps was Fireman, the senior combat staff officer of the Snowdance Corps. This was another old man of the Li family. Decades ago, he was the strongest fire-flaming realm expert in the Dark World. Today, decades later, he was still the strongest fire-flaming realm expert in the Dark World. He and Tianning controlled the Snowdance Corps and the European garrison respectively, which meant that Emperor Dong's palace had completely controlled the 5 Eastern European countries that Li Tianlan had obtained in the chaos of Snow Country. There were also new generations among the veterans of the Li family. It was said that Li Wangxing, one of the 4 spirits of Zhongzhou state, would also reach a new position in the rise of the new group. At present, the most ideal thing seemed to be to directly control a corps in the Border Control Corps. If his transfer went well, the old men of the Li family would have a new place to go. At present, the old men of the Li family were indeed veterans. They joined Emperor Dong's palace spontaneously, but the overall structure was not chaotic at all. It was orderly, structured, and clear. What was more valuable was that there was a clear follow-up plan and a clear division of labor, which did not make Li Tianlan feel embarrassed at all. They arranged themselves clearly. In addition to the team of the old men of the Li family, the remaining forces of Sai City, Mount Shu, Jade Pool, and the Academy inevitably looked a little messy. As more and more forces joined Emperor Dong's palace, the dissatisfaction caused by the unclear dividends were gradually brewing. Xiao Mahai hadn't been in Emperor Dong's palace for a long time, but he could clearly sense that the relationship between Li Baitian, Cool Breeze, and Drifting Cloud had become subtle. Although they hadn't become enemies, this sign was enough for Xiao Mahai to be highly vigilant. Any entity was made up of a combination of different forces. There were factions within factions. This was something unavoidable for any force. Under such circumstances, how to make their internal framework clearer was something that every ruler had to consider. The various forces from Sai City, Mount Shu, and Jade Pool formed the current Emperor Dong's palace and the new group. The new group, Emperor Dong's palace, and several other groups formed Zhongzhou state. On the other hand, it was the same. This was a normal phenomenon. Layer by layer, from an individual to a whole, it was clear and distinct. Xiao Mahai also wanted to build a clear framework for Emperor Dong's palace. It was specific to each person's position and responsibility. Just like the 6 groups in Zhongzhou state. Zhongyuan and Yuzhou of the giant group. Beihai and Wuyue of the southeast group. Southwest and Tianfu of the prince group. North City of the north group. Northeast and northwest of the academics. Special warfare agencies of the special warfare group. Every group knew where its foundation was, what it should do, and its position. In such a situation, they would fight, but as long as they knew where their position was, Zhongzhou state would never be in chaos. The main reason why Emperor Dong's palace was in such a situation was that it developed too fast. It could even be said that it had reached the sky in a single bound. The Dark World was caught off guard by this situation. And Emperor Dong's palace itself wasn't mentally prepared for this situation. It developed too fast, its foundation was too small, and there were too many talents. Xianyuan City was too small, and this stage couldn't accommodate too many talents who could take charge on their own. The self-adjustment of the veterans of the Li family relieved the pressure of Emperor Dong's palace to some extent. But it wasn't enough. It was far from enough. So Xiao Mahai was very anxious. He was anxious to expand. This was the best way to deal with the current situation. To expand to East Island, to America, to further strengthen the rule over Tiannan, to Europe, to the interior of Zhongzhou state, and to Snow Country. Xiao Mahai could totally imagine the main theme of Emperor Dong's palace in the next few years. The sharpness of Emperor Dong's palace would truly radiate to the entire Dark World. It would fight on 2 fronts, 3 fronts, and multiple fronts. Emperor Dong's palace had the strength now, so it naturally had to do it. This would be an extremely crazy era of expansion. According to the speculation of Xiao Mahai and others, if Emperor Dong's palace didn't take any action, then the internal chaos would probably really change in February next year. February next year. The new batch of graduates from the 2 academies was about to graduate. Emperor Dong's palace had been eyeing this batch of students since the day it was established. They were the most important fresh blood of Emperor Dong's palace. When this fresh blood flowed into Emperor Dong's palace, and Emperor Dong's palace still didn't take any big action, as time went by, the The relationship network inside Emperor Dong's palace would get out of control sooner or later. Therefore, expansion was imperative. Only by constantly expanding and expanding its own base could all kinds of talents in Emperor Dong's palace play their role and find their own positions. A new army, a new organizational structure, a new leader. Xiao Mahai was completely silent. His brain was almost completely occupied by all kinds of storms. Originally, he had planned to get off work, have dinner, and take a walk in Emperor Dong's palace to relax. But as more and more thoughts appeared in his mind, he returned to his desk and began to sort out the expected list after list, as well as the future military plan of Emperor Dong's palace. As a former general of Zhongzhou state, Xiao Mahai had not only the down-and-out time when he managed the desert prison, but also the high-spirited time when he led the army. His down-and-out was only because of his background, and it had nothing to do with his ability. If he was a mediocre person, he wouldn't have been favored by the giant group back then, and they even planned to pull him into the camp of the giant group. Such a Xiao Mahai might not know professional economic development, and he also lacked some overall view. But in terms of pure management and planning, he was absolutely not worse than anyone else. The sound of the helicopter's rotors faintly rang out outside the window. Li Tianlan looked at Xiao Mahai, who was already sitting behind his desk with a focused expression. He smiled and turned slightly. The next second, his figure appeared on the tarmac 1,000 meters away from the castle. The helicopter slowly landed from the air. Li Tianlan raised his head slightly. In the roaring wind, his gorgeous black windbreaker was constantly fluttering in the airflow. The helicopter landed not far from Li Tianlan. The hatch opened, and the chubby Xianyuan Wuxiang and the huge Xing Tian came out. Xianyuan Wuxiang's face was a little pale, livid. He looked at Li Tianlan and seemed to want to force a smile. But as soon as the corner of his mouth moved, he suddenly retched. Li Tianlan felt helpless. Xianyuan Wuxiang, the so-called doctor, was completely unfathomable, even in Li Tianlan's heart. This had nothing to do with the specific force. His treatment of patients had completely exceeded the understanding of everyone in this era. It was a kind of subversion of ideas, a unique means that science and even metaphysics could not explain. And such a person was seriously airsick, seasick, and even carsick. It was better if the journey was short. The relatively spacious private plane was better. But Xianyuan Wuxiang obviously couldn't adapt to the helicopter. It was thousands of kilometers from Yuzhou to Xianyuan City, and Xianyuan Wuxiang completely endured it. When he got off the plane, he couldn't bear it anymore, squatting aside and began to vomit. No matter how loyal Li Tianlan was to his brother, he didn't want to go over and admire it carefully. It was not until he was almost done vomiting and drank a large bottle of purified water that Li Tianlan shook his head slightly. "Look at you." Xianyuan Wuxiang laughed, his voice a little hoarse. He liked this place very much, but he really couldn't get used to the means of transportation here. The slight bumps on the car and the constant shaking on the plane all made him extremely annoyed and even anxious. That kind of enclosed narrow space was even more of a pain in the ass. With the technical level of the time corridor, even the worst single mecha or small spaceship, which had been eliminated for dozens of generations, could be equipped with holographic projections that could pass off as real and an absolutely still state of sight. After coming here, all the means of transportation really felt uncomfortable no matter how he experienced it. I think I should find an apostle to tailor a bicycle for me, or an electric car, or a motorcycle, the kind that doesn't need refueling. That kind of transportation may be the most suitable for me. Xianyuan Wuxiang muttered to himself. Li Tianlan didn't know who the apostle was, so he repeated again, "Look at you." Hee. Xianyuan Wuxiang suddenly laughed. He was indeed a good-for-nothing, but compared to Lin Shi, he also had the capital to gloat. The blockade of the real environment was a foregone conclusion, which meant that Lin Shi was still in America. Virtual shuttle. Under this level of suppression, it was completely bullsh**t. The 9th Prince of the Time Corridor was now studying how to buy a plane ticket in the Americas with a counterfeit phone. No one knew if his phone had internet, and no one knew if the 9th Prince, who was alone in a foreign country, could communicate with the locals. When they set off for Tiannan, Saint was ready to return to Beihai, while the apostle planned to virtual shuttle to America to bring Lin Shi back. Under the suppression of the real environment, even if it was a peak apostle, the distance each virtual travel was less than 1,000 meters. Moving all the way from Serene Province, even if his stamina could keep up, he would still be as tired as a dog. No matter how he thought about it, he felt incredibly bitter. I heard that you showed your power today. You fought 1 against 3 and even caught 1 alive. Xianyuan Wushang laughed. How do you know? Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. A few minutes ago, the news came out from a certain channel. Now the whole Zhongzhou state is probably crazy. Li Kuangtu, Jiang Shangyu, Gu Xingyun. 3 against 1, but they are still no match for you. No one can believe that Li Kuangtu and Gu Xingyun would join hands, and they can't believe that the 3 of them are no match for you. From now on, you are truly invincible in the world, big brother. Xianyuan Wushang gave him a thumbs up. Li Tianlan frowned slightly and subconsciously touched his phone, only to find that it was not with him at all. It could be expected that he must have a lot of missed calls now. He narrowed his eyes and vaguely sensed an unusual aura. He was besieged by Jiang Shangyu and the other 2 without any bystanders. News from a special channel? What kind of special channel? It should be the news released by Jiang Shangyu. Xianyuan Wushang touched his chin. Although the news of the defeat is not glorious, the fact is here. Even if they don't say it, it can't be hidden. And the image of your invincibility has probably been deeply rooted in people's hearts. Although it sounds incredible to fight 1 against 3, it is not unacceptable. That's why Jiang Shangyu released the news in a hurry. To some extent, it is a warning. A warning! Li Tianlan smiled coldly. Zhongzhou state has scruples about you. Xianyuan Wushang said softly. Jiang Shangyu pulled the strings in the middle and let Li Kuangtu and Gu Xingyun join hands. The whole dark world is very surprised, but for the current high-level officials of Zhongzhou state, this can be regarded as good news. Li Tianlan was expressionless. Li Huaqing's way of protecting Gu Xingyun is very obvious. He wants to protect 1 Gu Xingyun, not to mention 3. He knows very well that Gu Xingyun can't balance Emperor Dong's palace alone, but even so, he wants to protect him. Now there are 3, which is a surprise for him. Jiang Shangyu released the news, which is undoubtedly to tell Zhongzhou state that Li Kuangtu is now in your hands. Xianyuan Wushang smiled. If there is no accident, maybe Zhongzhou state will soon ask you for him. They don't have a suitable reason. Li Tianlan said blandly. Asking for him is the most important thing. They can find a reason at any time, Xianyuan Wushang shook his head. These are not important. The important thing is, if Zhongzhou state really asks, will you give him or not? Xianyuan Wushang asked this question very cautiously, because the meaning behind it was very profound. If Zhongzhou state asked Emperor Dong's palace for Li Kuangtu, to give him or not to give him, this was definitely a problem. The current situation was too sensitive. It was easy for Li Tianlan to make a decision, but he had to pay for it. There was no doubt that if he gave him to Li Kuangtu, Li Tianlan and even Emperor Dong's palace would be very uncomfortable in the future. Jiang Shangyu, Li Kuangtu, and Gu Xingyun were indeed no match for Li Tianlan. But when it came to the internal affairs of Zhongzhou state, many things could not be solved by force at all. There might be few saber lights and sword shadows, but in many cases, mutual deception was the most fatal. But if he didn't give them to Li Kuangtu, there might be many results. But no matter what the result was, Emperor Dong's palace would not feel good. Let's go. Li Tianlan slowly turned around. His figure flickered slightly in the night, appearing and disappearing from time to time. The ethereal sword energy gently fluctuated with his flickering in an imperceptible range. Xianyuan Wushang was stunned. He tried to feel the faint sword energy around him, and his eyes shone. How is Li Kuangtu now? Xianyuan Wushang asked. He's seriously injured and in a coma. Li Tianlan said casually, wake him up first. We have a lot to talk about. What about Zhongzhou state? Xianyuan Wushang asked tentatively. We'll talk about it after we talk. Li Tianlan said calmly. Chapter 1193. When the accurate news was passed through various departments to the Hidden Dragon Sea, Li Huaqing was discussing the layout of the academics for the next 5 years with Hua Xingyang. This was the most important thing for the academics at the moment. Li Huaqing had already been confirmed to be re-elected, and his position was so stable that there could be no more changes. In the past 10 years, due to the lack of foundation of the academics, although Li Huaqing had risen to the top, his style of doing things was relatively mild. The entire academics seemed to be struggling in the game with other groups, so they did not achieve the expected influence in 10 years. According to the normal development, if Li Huaqing retired next year, it would definitely be an unprecedented failure for the academics. They might still be in the ranks of the six, but they would be suppressed by the Prince Group of the Southeast Group in all aspects. It would even be difficult for them to compare with the giant group after the reshuffle. This was far from their expectations. In their expectations, during the 10 years when Li Huaqing was in power, even if the academics could not surpass the Prince Group of the Southeast Group to become the first group in Zhongzhou State, they should at least keep pace with the two ancient groups. If they had to survive in the shadow of other groups in the end, they could not accept this result at all. Fortunately, the change of the Wang family of Beihai and the rise of Emperor Dong's palace disrupted the rhythm of the major groups. Li Huaqing had another 5 years of precious time. In recent months, the backbone of the academics had come to Yuzhou intentionally or unintentionally. By taking the opportunity of reporting, they quietly exhorted Li Huaqing, hoping that Li Huaqing could pay more attention to the future of the team. The two remaining elders of the academics also came to Yuzhou to talk to Li Huaqing about this issue. They did not say anything explicitly, but the meaning was clear. They hoped that Li Huaqing could unite the forces that should be united most. This was undoubtedly telling Li Huaqing that he should take advantage of the 5 years to grasp the future of the academics. As the leader, Li Huaqing clearly felt the pressure from the inside. This pressure had existed as early as 2 years ago. The internal dissatisfaction of the academics with the status quo would become dissatisfaction with him over time. However, this dissatisfaction had not reached its peak. The news that he could be re-elected had come out, temporarily suppressing the undercurrent within the academics. However, the problem always existed, and it must be a problem worthy of facing. Li Huaqing's position seemed to be supreme, but no matter how much he cherished his country, he had to stabilize the internal situation. If there was no one supporting him internally, he couldn't do anything. Hua Xingyang's arrangement was the clearest signal. Li Huaqing's attitude was extremely firm. He wanted Hua Xingyang to be the head of the cabinet. This was also the greatest demand of the academics in this election. If they succeeded, the academics could guarantee that they would become the most powerful group in the next 5 years. After pushing Hua Xingyang to the top, there were still many internal adjustments to be made. With less than a year to go before the election, all the major groups were optimizing and adjusting their structures in order to form the most powerful group. It's not a big problem with the military. In the deep night, the office was brightly lit. Li Huaqing took a sip of tea and looked at Hua Xingyang. He smiled and said, "Minister Dongcheng is quite cooperative. We have studied the candidates carefully. I know that the candidates you recommended are quite capable. The official appointment should be in 1 or 2 months. Tell them to be careful." It seemed that he had made up his mind to adjust his thinking. In a private occasion, Li Huaqing's words were very clear. Hua Xingyang nodded and frowned. "How about the Praetorian Corps? We haven't talked about it yet. This issue is sensitive. Let's find a suitable opportunity." Li Huaqing felt a little helpless. Hua Xingyang snorted. He was a little dissatisfied. Of course, it was directed at Dongqing Wudi. The academics had never had a great influence on the army headquarters. In the most dangerous time, their control over the army headquarters was even far inferior to that of the Prince Group and the Giant Group. It was Qi Beitsong, the leader of the Special Warfare Group but closely connected to the Prince Group. Wei Tianhang, the veteran of the military. Yi Dongxing, the god of army in Zhongzhou State. All of them were super heavyweights whose influence in the army headquarters of Zhongzhou State exceeded their positions. At that time, the academics could not see any hope of breaking the deadlock. Therefore, in the first 5 years after Li Huaqing gained a foothold, the academics teamed up with the giant group. Dongqing Wudi became a director of Zhongzhou State and officially controlled the army headquarters. He clearly ranked third among the directors. After the election, he became the number 2 figure in Zhongzhou State. The academics undoubtedly hoped to unite the Prince Group to check and balance the strong influence of the Southeast and the Prince Group in the army headquarters. From the looks of it, this was a good move. In the past 5 years, most of the attention of the two groups in the army had been drawn by Dongqing Wudi. Dongqing Wudi, the god of massacre of Zhongzhou State, had been a marshal with real power for 20 years. Both internally and externally, he was tough and domineering, which made the prince and the Southeast group miserable. And the academics also took advantage of this opportunity to expand their influence in the army headquarters. But all this was obviously not enough. The academics hoped to further strengthen their influence on the army headquarters with Li Huaqing's re-election. This was a very reasonable request. But it was not a request that Dongqing Wudi was willing to accept. The focus was on the Border Control Corps. As the super-large comprehensive corps with the strongest combat capability in Zhongzhou State, the Border Control Corps could be said to be the unique flag of the army headquarters of Zhongzhou State. Its importance was far greater than that of several major theaters of operations. If they could get the leadership of the Border Control Corps, the academics would undoubtedly rise strongly in the army headquarters. But Dongqing Wudi did not mean to give in at all. A few years ago, the position of commander of the Border Control Corps finally fell to Di Jiang of the Wang family of Beihai, and a lot of deals were made in secret. After Di Jiang resigned, Dongqing Wudi continued to hold the position of commander of the Border Control Corps. The word, concurrently, was destined not to last long. After this election, Dongqing Wudi was still the executive minister of the army headquarters, but he had no reason to hold the position of commander of the Border Control Corps. Otherwise, the whole world would think that there was no one available in the army headquarters of Zhongzhou State. And this position was currently the focus of the giant group, the Southeast group, and the academics. It was not as simple as a member of parliament or a marshal with real power. Its significance could not be overemphasized. Does he still want the Eagle King of the Li family to control the Border Control Corps? Hua Xingyang's voice was a little gloomy. That's not it. Li Huaqing shook his head. The matter of Sky Eagle was mentioned once. Since he didn't agree at that time, it's unlikely to be him in the future. But when it comes to candidates, Minister Dongqing has too many candidates in his hands. The strength of the commander of the Border Control Corps was not the most important. The most important thing was prestige and fighting mind. Any commander of the several armies of the Border Control Corps was barely qualified to compete for that position. They were all Dongqing Wudi's direct subordinates. And Beihai also hoped that Yi Dongxing could concurrently serve as the commander of the Border Control Corps as the deputy minister and become a director. Needless to say, we have been fighting openly and secretly for several years. Until now, we can only take one step at a time. I'm afraid we can't really decide on the candidate until the eve of the election. We still have a chance, right? Hua Xingyang's voice was a little eager. Of course. Li Huaqing smiled. When he was about to continue to say something, the confidential phone on his desk suddenly rang. Li Huaqing raised his eyebrows slightly, picked up the phone, and said hello. Hua Xingyang didn't hear the voice on the other end of the phone clearly. He could only hear the other party's voice saying something in a hurry. Li Huaqing's face changed. He continued to listen attentively and made a sound of from time to time. It took about 5 minutes for a phone call. Li Huaqing silently put down the phone and pondered for a long time. Hua Xingyang wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. In the end, he suppressed his curiosity and said nothing. Li Huaqing glanced at him and said in a low voice, "It's about Tianlan, Gu Xingyun, and Jiang Shangyu. Hey, I'm afraid it's really difficult this time." What's wrong? Hua Xingyang's heart tightened slightly. In the current Zhongzhou state, anything about Li Tianlan and Emperor Dong's palace needed to be treated with caution. Just like the Wang family of Beihai before. Anything about Wang Tianzong needed to be treated with caution. What Li Tianlan said more than 2 years ago had really become a reality today. For Zhongzhou state, He was the overall situation of Zhongzhou state. Li Huaqing let out a long breath, reached for a cigarette, took out one, lit it, and took a big drag. After smoking nearly half of the cigarette, he waved the smoke in front of him away and said in a low voice, after Li Tianlan left Yuzhou, he went to Tiannan and was besieged by Jiang Shangyu, Gu Xingyun, and Li Guangtu. The battle is now over. Jiang Shangyu and Gu Xingyun are seriously injured, and Li Guangtu is captured by Li Tianlan. According to the time, Li Guangtu should be in Emperor Dong's palace now. Hua Zhenyang was stunned and his face changed dramatically. Li Guangtu? Gu Xingyun? He was agitated, his voice was high and low, and his face was full of disbelief. It's incredible, right? Li Huaqing smiled bitterly and rubbed his forehead. But this is the truth. 3 against 1, not only did they not win, but they also lost miserably. Even Li Guangtu was captured. Fortunately, Jiang Shangyu ran fast. Otherwise, if all 3 fell into Li Tianlan's hands, things would be more difficult. Hua Zhenyang was obviously still immersed in the names of Li Guangtu and Gu Xingyun. How could they join hands? It doesn't matter. Li Huaqing said lightly, if we really want to find out the reason, it's probably because of pressure. We all attended Senior Li's funeral. The relationship between Li Guangtu and Li Tianlan is a little tense. The former doesn't recognize the current Emperor Dong's palace, but there is no doubt that both of them want the leadership of the Li family. According to the current situation, how can the Purgatory of Heaven capital have a chance? The strength of the Purgatory of Heaven capital is still there. Hua Zhenyang said subconsciously, and then shook his head. But many of them seem to have left in the past 2 years and joined Emperor Dong's palace. That's what happened. And do you really think that those who stay in the Purgatory of Heaven capital are willing to die for Li Guangtu? It's impossible. Not counting those who have left, those who still stay in the Purgatory of Heaven capital must also be swaying between Li Guangtu and Li Tianlan. These people's attitudes toward the outside world are unquestionable. But in their hearts, Emperor Dong's palace is the same as inside, and they can't do it. In this case, if Emperor Dong's palace really goes to war with the Purgatory of Heaven capital, it's good enough that 1/3 of them are willing to die for the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Li Huaqing shook his head. Hua Zhenyang didn't speak for a while, but he had no doubt about Li Huaqing's speculation. Or it was not speculation at all, but a fact. If Emperor Dong's palace had just started and was still called East Emperor Palace, perhaps there would be more people standing in the Purgatory of Heaven capital. But East Emperor Palace had become Emperor Dong's palace. What was Emperor Dong's palace like now? A truly invincible palace master. 3 deputy palace masters of the invincible realm. Nearly 20 experts of the half-step invincible realm and the peak of the thundershocking realm. Dozens of experts of the thundershocking realm. At present, such a lineup could not be said to be worse than other forces. This kind of lineup was unique in the entire Dark World. The current Emperor Dong's palace was the strongest. If only the high-end combat capability of the thundershocking realm was counted, the current Emperor Dong's palace was not worse than the Wang family of Beihai at its peak a few years ago. The only uncertainty was whether the current Li Tianlan or Wang Tianzong in Mormons was stronger. But anyway, such Emperor Dong's palace had crushed the Purgatory of Heaven capital in all aspects. No matter from which aspect, Emperor Dong's palace was superior. In this way, even if a large number of the elders of the Li family stayed in the Purgatory of Heaven capital, it was hard to say which side they were on. Li Tianlan, Hua Zhenyang was silent for a while and whispered, I suddenly agree with the Prime Minister's point of view. The Prime Minister he mentioned was naturally Qin Fangqing, whose funeral was over. It's too late. Li Huaqing sighed slightly. Now he also had this kind of emotion. This emotion was not directed at Li Tianlan. It was an instinctive fear of a behemoth that was almost out of control from his own standpoint. Not to mention that Li Tianlan had developed to this extent. From Li Huaqing's standpoint, even if his own son had developed to this extent, he would also worry and fear. What should we do now? Hua Zhenyang asked. Prepare the car. Li Huaqing's voice was low. We'll be busy tonight. He paused. Go to the Interstellar Research Institute and see how the meeting is going. Hua Xingyang nodded silently. The Interstellar Research Institute was a branch of the Zhongzhou State Academy of Sciences, which gathered all the most famous astrophysicists in Zhongzhou State. It could be said to be the astrophysics authority in Zhongzhou State. The blue moon a few hours ago had already shocked the world. As soon as the blue moon disappeared, countries such as Star State, Snow Country, England, France, Germany, East Island, Bansi, and Italos had contacted Zhongzhou State immediately. As the most powerful country in the world in terms of comprehensive strength, Zhongzhou State had surpassed Star State and Snow Country in the development of astronomy in the past 100 years. The NOAA-1 interstellar probe launched by Zhongzhou State 50 years ago was about to leave the Kuiper belt of the solar system. It had landed on the moon several times and gained a lot of results. After the Blue Moon incident, all countries began to communicate with Zhongzhou State. In today's Interstellar Research Institute, the astrophysics experts of Zhongzhou State had held several hours of video conferences with the elites of various countries, putting forward various theories to explore some truths that might exist behind the blue moon. In fact, ordinary people might scoff at extraterrestrial civilization, or be skeptical, or believe it deeply. But no matter what their attitude was, there were very few people who had really seen extraterrestrial civilization, or they were bragging about something that didn't exist at all. But when it came to specific countries, any country would have some confidential information. They had never really seen extraterrestrial civilization. But in the Interstellar Research Institute, well, to be exact, in the exploration of the solar system, every superpower had some bits and pieces of information. Led by Zhongzhou State and Star State, their research on the moon was quite in-depth. In several lunar explorations, they found some mysterious metal wreckage and saw the vague ruins near the pyramids on the moon. At the same time, a lot of information proved one fact. That was, the moon shouldn't exist. There were also many ancient documents that recorded that a long, long time ago, there was no moon in the sky above the Earth. These ancient documents didn't refer to Zhongzhou State. Instead, there were similar records in the ancient documents found all over the world. For example, the mysterious and ancient Mayan civilization that did exist. In the Chronicles of the Mayans, there were descriptions of Mars and Venus, but there was no record of the moon. In the Classic of Mountains and Seas of Zhongzhou State, the first description of the moon appeared after Emperor Xianxia. There were too many similar records in too many documents. All the signs seemed to show that the moon suddenly appeared out of thin air one day in the ancient and long time ago. No one knew how long this period of time was, but based on all the signs, if the moon suddenly appeared out of thin air, it should have been more than 10,000 years ago. As for the origin of the moon, there was no accurate statement in the scientific community. There were only various hypotheses. But this time, the time of the blue moon once again aroused the enthusiasm or uneasiness of all countries about the moon. After the blue moon, several of the most powerful countries in the world almost gathered together and began to discuss. Let's see the results of their discussion first. If necessary, we can share some confidential information. Of course, we need other countries to exchange confidential information. Since it's a discussion, we must be frank, especially Star State. You keep an eye on this. Li Huaqing continued. Hua Xingyang nodded and looked at Li Huaqing. What about you? I'm going to find Guo Wendian, and then to see Dongqing Wudi. Li Huaqing shook his head. The natural disasters that may happen are never as terrible as the man-made disasters that may happen. I want Zhongzhou State to be stable. Zhongzhou State must also be stable. Hua Xingyang was silent for a while, then nodded and said, I see. He knew very well what Li Huaqing meant. Li Huaqing wanted stability, and Emperor Dong's palace was now the source of instability. But from the standpoint of Emperor Dong's palace, they did nothing wrong at all. The so-called source of instability was just some situation that the parliament made up because it was afraid of Emperor Dong's palace. Li Huaqing wanted to balance the power of Emperor Dong's palace. This also meant that he needed to create an opponent for Emperor Dong's palace. Such an opponent could be weaker than Emperor Dong's palace, but it was necessary. Gu Xingyun was not important, but it was an option. Jiang Shangyu was not important, but it was also an option. Li Kuangtu and Purgatory of Heaven Capital were not important, but they were also options. When the three of them joined forces, this choice seemed to be very reliable. So Li Huaqing planned to ask Li Tianlan for Gu Xingyun. But now Li Tianlan was not the Li Tianlan a few years ago. As the superpower with the strongest combat capability in the Dark World, the young East Emperor was in charge of Shenyuan City, and he was really invincible in the world. Even if it was Li Huaqing, he wouldn't be able to get someone from his hands so easily. Especially in yesterday's meeting, Li Huaqing and Li Tianlan did not get along very well. The abrupt exposure of the Phoenix Pavilion had caused a stir within the parliament. Everyone had a complicated feeling. It turned out that during the more than 20 years when Gu Xingyun was the war god of Zhongzhou state, he did a lot of outrageous things secretly, and some of them even hurt the interests of many people to a certain extent. For example, the Li family was the biggest victim. The treason case of the Li family more than 20 years ago was likely a conspiracy initiated by the Gu family or a blatant frame-up. If this matter was made public, how much of a stir would it cause in Zhongzhou state? Li Tianlan entered the secular world at the beginning, perhaps for this day. Gu Xianyan had enough evidence in her hands. As long as she was willing to say it, every word she said could cause a huge stir in Zhongzhou state. It was also because of this that Li Huaqing felt incredible about the cooperation between Gu Xingyun and Li Kuangtu. He did not let Gu Xianyan give more evidence at the meeting, which had caused great dissatisfaction in Li Tianlan. What he did might be for the good of Zhongzhou state, but from another perspective, it was equivalent to Li Huaqing had expressed his attitude towards the treason case. The treason case had always been an unsolved case in Zhongzhou state. It was complicated and confusing, and no one had really said anything. But Li Huaqing's attitude was very obvious. Whether the treason case was true or not, he did not want anyone to mention it again. This also meant that he did not allow anyone to mention what had happened to the Li family for more than 20 years. It could be imagined how strong the dissatisfaction in Li Tianlan's heart was. Under such circumstances, Li Tianlan caught Li Kuangtu. Li Huaqing also decided to ask Li Tianlan for Li Kuangtu. Although Hua Xingyang stood on the standpoint of the academics, if he put himself in Li Tianlan's shoes, he would feel that Li Huaqing had gone too far. Li Tianlan really took him as a doe with no temper and could do whatever he wanted. Li Tianlan was young and aggressive. If he really acted impulsively and completely fell out with Li Huaqing, it was likely that there would be a situation in which he and Zhongzhou state would regret it. It was impossible for Li Huaqing not to think of this. So he had to visit Guo Wenyan and Dongqing Wudi overnight. He had to reach a consensus with Guo Wenyan to put pressure on Emperor Dong's palace. He also had to reach a consensus with Dongqing Wudi to give Emperor Dong's palace huge compensation. The compensation this time was likely to be a big loss, saving Li Kuangtu and making up for what had happened to the Li family for many years. Such compensation was completely unimaginable. At the very least, the border control corps that several groups had been fighting for should be gone. Hua Xingyang sighed, shook his head, and walked out of the office. Li Huaqing sat in the office, smoked a cigarette silently, and opened the office door. Outside the office, Ma Si, the secretary who was sorting out the materials, stood up immediately. Get off work. Before she could speak, Li Huaqing had waved his hand. It's very late today. I'll go to Wentian's place. You don't have to follow me. Ma Si smiled and nodded. By the way, Li Huaqing suddenly said, is Minister Dongqing in the Hidden Dragon Sea tonight? As one of the directors of Zhongzhou state, Dongqing Wudi naturally had his own residence in the Hidden Dragon Sea, but he occasionally lived in the Bai family's manor. Yes. Ma Si nodded. Something happened in Liaodong. Speaker Bai rushed back to deal with it. Minister Dongqing came back here in the evening. Li Huaqing nodded and said, He went out of the door and walked slowly to Guo Wentian's residence. It was already late at night, but many people in the world had not slept at this time. 3 masters besieged Li Tianlan and failed miserably. Was this the same thing? These were 2 completely different things. The first was the cooperation between Gu Xingyun and Li Kuangtu. The second was Li Tianlan's unparalleled strength. All the people who knew what this meant would find it hard to rest at this time. This must include Guo Wentian. Guo Wentian was meeting a guest. To be exact, he was video chatting with someone. When the secretary respectfully opened the office door, Li Huaqing saw Guo Wentian, with a serious and livid face, pacing back and forth in the office at first glance. A somewhat familiar voice with a trace of electric current sounded in the office. That's about it. Fortunately, things can still be controlled. We can make a deep review to the parliament and dissolve the Phoenix Pavilion, but the voice paused. Obviously, he had seen Li Huaqing coming in. Guo Wentian nodded to Li Huaqing, took a deep breath, and forced himself to calm down. Li Huaqing looked around the office. There was a huge screen that had been temporarily set up in the office. On the screen, Jiang Shangyu and Gu Xingyun, with pale faces, were together. Before Li Huaqing came in, they were discussing the Phoenix Pavilion. Li Huaqing's expression was calm, and there was no emotion in his voice. "Where are you?" "We're safe now," Jiang Shangyu said in a low voice. The picture on the screen flickered from time to time, and the sound of electric current was very obvious. Obviously, the signal on the other side was extremely poor, and the communication might be interrupted at any time. Li Huaqing didn't talk nonsense. He looked at Gu Xingyun, narrowed his eyes, and said in a cold voice, "What are you going to do about the Phoenix Pavilion?" Gu Xingyun's face was obviously distorted. Obviously, he still couldn't bear the sudden exposure of the secret agency that he had carefully cultivated for decades. Thinking of Gu Xianyan, the disciple he had cultivated with all his strength, Gu Xingyun clenched his fists tightly. "I can provide a list of all the people in the Phoenix Pavilion, but it doesn't make much sense," Gu Xingyun said in a hoarse voice. "We'll talk about this when you come back. You know your current situation and we are now." The picture on the screen suddenly flickered, and then it was completely black. Li Huaqing's voice stopped. "The signal over there is too bad." Guo Wentian let out a long breath. This is the third time. Li Huaqing was silent for a while and asked, "What do they think?" Guo Wentian sighed and rubbed his face with a bitter smile. During this period of time, it was really eventful. Every day, he was mentally and physically exhausted. Jiang Shangyu's meaning is very obvious. He wants us to put pressure on Emperor Dong's palace and get Li Kuangtu back. Before you came, we had talked a lot. The Purgatory of Heaven capital, Kunlun City, and Jiang Shangyu intend to merge into a new force to fight against Emperor Dong's palace. To be honest, I agree with this proposal. No matter from which perspective, Emperor Dong's palace has now reached the point where it must be contained. If it continues to develop, it is even more threatening than the Wang family of Beihai. Li Tianlan is too young. In his early 20s, he has at least a few decades to develop. During this period, if Emperor Dong's palace does not contain them, their development is simply unimaginable. I think it's time to put some pressure on Li Tianlan. It's not enough to just put pressure on him. Li Huaqing shook his head. Zhongzhou State can accommodate Emperor Dong's palace. At the end of the day, from our standpoint, we just don't want an absolutely invincible force. What I want has always been very clear: balance, not extinction. As long as Emperor Dong's palace develops within a controllable range, it will be of great benefit to Zhongzhou State. Because of Li Tianlan's existence, Zhongzhou State may even completely unify the Dark World in the next few decades. I don't need to tell you the significance of this. You know very well. So, Guo Wentian asked with a straight face. Appropriate compensation is necessary, Li Huaqing said. Guo Wentian sneered. Is compensation really appropriate? Li Huaqing sat on the sofa, lit a cigarette, and said quietly, "In fact, I'm not afraid of Emperor Dong's palace demanding an exorbitant price. I'm afraid that he won't ask. Zhongzhou State is indeed very strong, but you and the Prime Minister have some misunderstandings when you were alive. First, you seem to be very firm that as long as Zhongzhou State can make up its mind, it can kill Emperor Dong's palace and the Wang family of Beihai. Second, you seem to think that without Zhongzhou State, Emperor Dong's palace can't survive. Similarly, you haven't considered who will replace Emperor Dong's palace and the Wang family of Beihai without them. Zhongzhou State has the strength to destroy Emperor Dong's palace and the Wang family of Beihai, but what happens after that? Any force, as long as it has enough strength, development is inevitable. If we destroy the current Li Tianlan, there will be a second Li Tianlan sooner or later. If he can't develop to this extent, it can only mean that he doesn't have the potential as the current Li Tianlan. We want a super expert who can unify the dark world, but we also want him to be absolutely loyal to us. This is impossible. When an individual is strong enough, how can he have absolute loyalty to the group? You have always wanted to suppress Emperor Dong's palace and the Wang family of Beihai by force, putting pressure and constantly restricting them, but is it really meaningful? If you really push them into a desperate situation, you've seen Wang Xianxiao's counterattack. Now, facing the Beihai corps that has expanded to 500,000 people and is still recruiting, what do you think? Guo Wentian frowned. We are talking about Emperor Dong's palace now. There's nothing different. Li Huaqing said blandly, it's true that Emperor Dong's palace doesn't have a legion of hundreds of thousands of people, but they also don't have a base that has been operating for hundreds of years. So, Li Tianlan is more likely to go to extremes. If we really push him into a corner, he will completely turn against us. Believe it or not, big countries like Star State and Snow Country will cry and beg Li Tianlan to join them. As long as Li Tianlan is willing, those people will kneel down to welcome him without any hesitation. What Zhongzhou State can give Li Tianlan, Star State can also give, or even more. That's treason. Guo Wentian looked angry. Li Tianlan once said a sentence in the chaos of Snow Country. Li Huaqing said softly, if Zhongzhou State doesn't betray me, I won't betray Zhongzhou State. Nothing is taken for granted. You can ask Li Tianlan to do anything, but Li Tianlan can also ask Zhongzhou State to do anything. This is the rule, a matter of principle. In the name of keeping an eye on the overall situation, you endlessly oppress a person and tell him that the overall situation is the most important, which is beyond the principle. Let's imagine if things really develop to this point, and Li Tianlan turns against us, what will the situation be? Guo Wentian's face was livid, and he said nothing. If Li Tianlan really betrayed the country and went to other countries with the core team of Emperor Dong's palace, there are still many people he cares about here, and some people he can't take away, such as Dong Qingwudi. As long as he dares to leave, Dong Qingwudi's end is completely imaginable. Guo Wentian gritted his teeth. What a coincidence! As long as he is driven away, we can also imagine the end of you, me, and everyone in Zhongzhou State. If Li Tianlan insists on killing you, who in the world can stop him? Li Huaqing seemed to be so angry that he laughed. Guo Wentian trembled all over, and after a long while, he snorted coldly. I'm not here to fight with you today. Li Huaqing waved his hand and said, I'm not here to listen to your complaints. Things have happened. Now we really need to set up an opponent for Emperor Dong's palace, so that they won't go astray. So pressure is necessary. It's necessary to get Li Kuang to back. But compensation is also necessary. Let's reach an agreement first, and then I can communicate with Dong Qingwudi and talk to Li Tianlan through Dong Qingwudi. It's more euphemistic, and the other party will accept it more easily. It sounds like begging him. Guo Wentian gritted his teeth. We can order him, but we have to deal with it separately. Just from this matter, this is the internal affairs of the Li family, and our request, in his opinion, is a little too much. Li Huaqing was calm. Guo Wentian looked at him in a daze. After a long while, he suddenly gritted his teeth and said, Then what do you want to give him? You shouldn't think so. Li Huaqing looked up at him and said, It should be, what should we give him to make him willing to let him go? In other words, there is something that we can take out to exchange with him. The night of Wulan State, shrouded in the polar night, seemed to reveal a bottomless depth. Snowflakes fluttered in the air and fell in the crisscrossing lights in the station of the Snowdance Corps. Thousands of elites of the Snowdance Corps were still stabilizing the situation in the dark nights. There were still nearly 10,000 elites here, silently holding on. When Fireman came to the office of the deputy commander, the secretary was coming from the corner of the stairs with a large lunchbox. The edge of the lunchbox was steaming, which made people feel very kind and warm. Seeing Fireman, The secretary was stunned and subconsciously raised his hand to salute. What's delicious? An extra meal for Eagle tonight? Fireman smiled and asked casually. A few small stir-frying dishes and 2 pounds of rice. The general has been busy since the morning and just has some free time. The secretary smiled. Give it to me. Fireman took the lunchbox and waved his hand. Go and do your work. The secretary hesitated, nodded, and returned to his seat. He was originally a grassroots officer of the Thunderbolt Corps. After coming to the Snowdance Corps, he coincidentally became Li Tianying's secretary. He didn't know much about the Li family, but he knew that Fireman had a good relationship with his boss last time. Both of them were from the Li family. Occasionally, when they were free, they would sit together and reminisce about the past. Unfortunately, they couldn't drink in the army station, which made Li Tianying feel a little regretful. Fireman knocked on the door of the deputy commander's office. Before waiting for a response, he pushed the door open and went in. Li Tianying was sitting on the sofa in the office and watching the news of Wulan State. He looked serious. When he saw Fireman, he froze for a moment and then laughed. My treatment as the deputy commander is a little high. I let the senior combat staff officer of the army be my secretary. This standard, good guy, I'm flattering the leader in advance so that you won't make things difficult for me in the future. Fireman snorted coldly, put the lunchbox on the table and opened it. There was only one bowl and chopsticks in it. He didn't bother to say more, so he picked up the bowl and took a bite. With your behavior, I'll make things difficult for you in the future. Li Tianying laughed and took another bowl and chopsticks to enjoy dinner. The parliament fully respected Dongqing Wudi's opinion on the affairs of the Zhongzhou State Corps in Europe. They all knew that this was Li Tianlan's territory. Therefore, from beginning to end, the other major groups, even the Prince Group, had not expressed any views on the personnel here. Cheng Huaining, the highest officer of the Corps in Europe, had been here for several years. It was time to move. Dongqing Wudi relied on him very much, and his transfer would be put forward in the near future. Taking advantage of the precarious time of the Special Warfare Group, Dongqing Wudi hoped to completely eliminate the influence left by his predecessor, Qi Beizong. Therefore, Cheng Huaining should be transferred back to Yuzhou, promoted by 1 rank, to take over by Qingzhao's current position, or to take over the position left by Yi Dongxing. The highest officer of the Corps in Europe was Li Tianying. As one of the strongest veterans left by the Li family, Li Tianying was undoubtedly a half-step invincible realm expert, and he was at the top level. Without enough strength, Zhongzhou State would not have used his name as the designation of a special force decades ago. He was originally a candidate pushed by Dongqing Wudi to compete for the commander of the Border Control Corps. Now the conditions were not ripe, so it was not a bad thing to stay in Europe for a while. Although Fireman was in the fire-flaming realm, his strength was no worse than Li Tianying's. After Li Tianying took control of the European garrison, Fireman would become the new commander of the Snowdance Corps. Of course, it was also possible that Li Tianying would concurrently serve as the commander of the Snowdance Corps, and Fireman would become the deputy commander, just like the relationship between Cheng Huaining and Li Tianying. But no matter what the position was, Fireman would be the leader of the Snowdance Corps in the future. And this place would gradually become a gathering place for the veterans of the Li family in Emperor Dong's palace. You look in a good mood? Fireman asked thoughtfully while eating, looking at his old friend with a smile on the corner of his mouth. Li Tianying was puzzled. I've been in a good mood. Do you mean something? Fireman didn't speak for a while. I knew you wouldn't look for me if you had nothing to do. Tell me, what's going on? Li Tianying picked up a piece of fried meat with chili with his chopsticks and ate until sweat came out of the tip of his nose. You should have received the news, right? Fireman asked calmly. Li Tianying's movements paused slightly. After a long while, he said slowly, It's about the young master? Which young master? Fireman asked directly in a very direct tone. Young master. It was a very interesting title. Li Tianying and Fireman were both in their 60s, older than Li Guangtu and Li Tianlun. Both of them used to follow Li Honghe, especially Fireman, who was one of the sacred guards around Li Honghe. After Li Kuangtu broke through to the invincible realm, Fireman followed Li Kuangtu and became the sacred guard around him. From the perspective of the two of them, starting from Li Honghe, Li Tianlan was undoubtedly the young master, and Li Kuangtu could also be regarded as the original young master. Li Tianying put down his bowl and chopsticks and looked at Fireman silently. After a few minutes, he said lightly, "What do you mean?" Fireman smiled and asked the question he had just asked. "You should have received the news too, right?" Li Tianying frowned and was a little impatient. "What do you want to say?" "I don't know." Fireman shook his head. "I'm at a loss. I don't know what to say. I always feel uncomfortable." Li Tianying suddenly smiled and picked up the bowl and chopsticks again. "You see, I'm in a good mood now." "Yes, I'm envious to see you like this." Fireman whispered. "Because I never think so much. One thing I know is that I'm a member of the Li family. More than 30 years ago, when I was on a mission in Heng State, if it hadn't been for Senior Li, I would have been torn to pieces and buried in a foreign country. From that day on, I told myself that I was a member of the Li family. The Li family is good at any time. I've experienced the peak of the Li family's power. I've also followed Senior Li to live in the border incognito for many years. I've experienced all the ups and downs. No matter what kind of Li family it is, the Li family is good. I like staying in the Li family and have never thought about leaving, so why think so much?" Li Tianying said carelessly. Fireman frowned and said in a deep voice, "Thinking too much doesn't mean you want to leave the Li family. If you don't want to leave, why think so much?" Li Tianying's voice was a little cold. Before Senior Li died, he made it clear that Tianlan was the heir of the Li family. This is Senior Li's will. I don't care about the rest. But anyone who doesn't recognize Senior Li's will, no matter who he is my enemy, the kind that will fight to the death. "So you're indifferent to Tianlan's arrest of Kuangtu?" Fireman's voice was a little complicated. Li Tianying was silent for a while and said lightly, "I've never liked Kuangtu very much. He was like this in the past. Everything was carried to the extreme. Such a person may succeed in everything, but once he fails once, it will be difficult for him to turn over. It turns out that my view is correct. A large part of the reason why he has what he has today is because of his character. I don't like him and I don't recognize him. The real heir of the Li family is not him, so why should I care? Even if Tianlan kills him?" Fireman asked abruptly. Li Tianying was slightly stunned. He stopped in place with his chopsticks and frowned without saying a word. He put down his bowl and chopsticks. If Tianlan really wanted to kill him, he wouldn't have taken him back to Emperor Dong's palace. You should know this very well. Indeed. Fireman nodded. But just in case. He's not dead now, but who can predict the next development? If Tianlan is impulsive, then kill him. If he's dead, he's dead. Li Tianying suddenly said. Fireman looked up at Li Tianying in astonishment. Li Tianying smiled, but his smile was a little cold. He asked the same question that Fireman had asked. "You should have received the news, right?" Fireman frowned slightly. "Don't you think this news is very interesting?" Li Tianying asked. "The news should have been released by Xianxia." Fireman frowned and said in a deep voice, "This news, well, first, it is told to the Zhongzhou State Parliament. After the Parliament knows about this, it will definitely take action. Tianlan is too strong in Zhongzhou State now, and they need a candidate who can balance Tianlan. Second, it is to tell us, the elders of the Li family, that they hope we can put pressure on Tianlan." Fireman twitched the corner of his mouth. There should be a purpose to stimulate Tianlan. If Tianlan impulsively kills Kuangtu, not only Zhongzhou State will be disappointed, but also we will be disappointed. Then maybe a lot of stories will happen. "I'm not disappointed at all," Li Tianying suddenly said. Fireman frowned. "I mean," Li Tianying looked at Fireman, "don't you think this news is very interesting? Jiang Shangyu, Li Kuangtu, and Gu Xingyun joined forces." He stared into Fireman's eyes. Li Kuangtu and Gu Xingyun joined forces. Fireman. "Joined forces?" Li Tianying laughed. but his eyes were extremely cold. After the treason case, Senior Li gathered all the forces that could be gathered in a short time and took us to the border. Do you know the exact number of people at that time? I know. Li Tianying pointed at his chest. 1,983. 20 years. In the past 20 years, 133 people in the Li family died of natural causes. By natural causes, I mean because of illness, old injuries, and internal injuries, and because there was no condition to treat them. At that time, we didn't even have a bottle of penicillin in the camp. Fireman. In the past 20 years, more than 800 brothers have gone to the purgatory of heaven capital by stealing the sky and replacing the sun. When young master left the border for Huading a few years ago, there were more than 100 brothers in the border camp. Fireman. Li Tianying's voice was calm. It was calm to the extreme, which was a kind of hysterical madness. Tell me, where are the others? Fireman had nothing to say. Do you think Kunlun City will let us go when we get to the border? Cut the weeds and get rid of the roots. Those brothers who really died are the best answer. For more than 20 years, I like the so-called hard life we've lived, and I'm King willing. I think it's good to live like this. But except for myself and my brothers who share weal and woe with me, no one else is qualified to tell me that it's good to live like this. It's all because of Gu Xingyun, Kunlun City, and Li Kuangtu himself. I don't blame him. None of us hates Li Kuangtu. Until today. And now, what do I hear? Li Kuangtu and Gu Xingyun have joined forces. Tianlan left the border to restore the glory of the Li family, to avenge Li Kuangtu, to destroy Kunlun City, and to return everything that our Li family has suffered for more than 20 years. And now, Li Kuangtu, the initiator of everything, has joined forces with Gu Xingyun. He is targeting the people of the Li family, the heir designated by Senior Li, the person who wants to avenge him, and the person who wants to get back all the honor he has lost. Fuck joining forces. Bang. Crush. Li Tianying directly overturned the table in front of him. Vegetables, rice, meat, bowls, chopsticks, lunchboxes, and everything hit the wall, making a loud noise. What we've suffered for more than 20 years. What about those brothers who are really buried at the border? What about your years in the desert prison? He joined forces with Gu Xingyun. What the hell is this? When he joined forces with Gu Xingyun, did he ever think about the brothers who were standing behind him in the purgatory of heaven capital? Did he ever think about what happened to us at the border? Did he ever think about his father and his family, who once stood at the peak of Zhongzhou State, but because of him, he was reduced to struggling at the border? Oh, maybe he thought about it. I think he thought about it. Then, on behalf of the Li family, on behalf of Senior Li, on behalf of each of us, dead and alive, on behalf of all the Li family, he told Gu Xingyun, I forgive you on behalf of the Li family. I forgive you for what you have done. Let's go and deal with Li Tianlan. Does he deserve it? Disloyal, unfilial, and unjust. Will I be disappointed if Tianlan kills him? I won't be disappointed. I'm going to have a good celebration. In the hasty knock on the door, the secretary, who heard the noise, directly pushed open the office door. Li Tianying waved his hand and said, It's okay. Order another meal. I'll celebrate. The corner of Fireman's mouth twitched awkwardly. The awkwardness was expressed in his whole body. He couldn't say that he could understand Li Tianying's mood, because he didn't really empathize. What he remembered was all the good times when he was by Li Kuangtu's side, that friendship. Li Tianying remembered everything he had suffered at the border. Friendship? The moment he heard that Li Kuangtu and Gu Xingyun had joined forces, the so-called friendship seemed to have completely disappeared. Looking at Li Tianying's excited expression, Fireman sighed deeply. He had every reason to believe that after learning that Li Kuangtu had joined forces with Gu Xingyun, Li Tianying was definitely not the only one who had given up on Li Kuangtu. More veterans of the Li family would have this idea. Give up? Or this was not giving up at all. Because from the moment Li Kuangtu joined forces with Gu Xingyun, he seemed to have given up his identity as a member of the Li family and the grievances between the Li family and Kunlun City. And this was what the Li family had insisted on for many years until now. Chapter 1194. When Li Huaqing arrived in front of the general hall, he saw Dongqing Wudi's secretary, Lin Guoqiang, hurriedly trotting over from another direction, carrying a greasy paper bag in his hand. The two met in front of the general hall. Lin Guoqiang froze and saluted subconsciously. Before he could speak, Li Huaqing had already laughed. He pointed to the paper bag in Lin Guoqiang's hand and said with a smile, "What treasure?" Lin Guoqiang grinned and said, "General Han Bing came to Yuzhou for a meeting and brought some spiced beef from my hometown for the minister. The minister is happy tonight and wants to drink some." Shi Han Bing, the commander of the Pegasus Army of the Border Control Corps. Li Huaqing nodded slightly, his eyes twinkling. 5 years ago, Dongqing Wudi entered the army headquarters, and the status of the Border Control Corps naturally rose. Thunder God of the Blood Battalion was not moved for the time being, but Pegasus, Huang Sha, and the new commander of the Thunderbolt Battalion were all promoted. After Dongqing Wudi left, Shi Han Bing could be said to be the most murderous general in the Border Control Corps, and also a world-famous general of wisdom. He was once called the brain and military counselor of the Border Control Corps together with Cheng Huaining. After the recommendation of Li Tianying as the commander of the Border Control Corps was rejected by the parliament, Shi Han Bing was undoubtedly a strong contender for this position. Li Huaqing shook his head subconsciously. The problem of the commander of the Border Control Corps had been lingering. The biggest problem was that Dongqing Wudi had too many bargaining chips in his hands. As the commander of the Border Control Corps for more than 20 years, Dongqing Wudi's prestige was like the sun at high noon in the entire army headquarters. For more than 20 years, Li Huaqing couldn't even count how many senior commanders had come out of the Border Control Corps. It was worthy of being the richest family in the army headquarters, and its influence was still above the Southeast Group and the Prince Group. It was almost impossible for other groups to compete for the position of the commander of the Border Control Corps. Li Tianying could be rejected. Dongqing Wudi could also reject the candidates proposed by other groups. The result of such mutual rejection was almost predictable, so no one would ask for this position for the time being without the right opportunity. Dongqing Wudi could only hold it. Dongqing Wudi also didn't mention Shi Han Bing for the time being. And Li Huaqing knew that even if Dongqing Wudi's recommendation of Shi Han Bing was rejected again, he still had other qualified candidates in his hands to take this position. Even if he rejected them, he still had candidates to recommend. This was Dongqing Wudi's biggest bargaining chip and confidence in Zhongzhou state. The others could only be envious or jealous. There was nothing they could do. The best thing to do now was to bide his time and wait for an opportunity. The university, the Southeast, and even the Prince Group were all waiting in silence. The rise of new groups impacted the pattern of Zhongzhou state. The general election was approaching. The compromise and competition, both overt and covert, had reached a white-hot level. Swords and knives were everywhere. They were all waiting for the new group to make mistakes. Even if he didn't make any mistakes, he hoped to see the new group encounter some difficult situations, and then exchange interests for the position of Commander-in-Chief of the Border Control Corps in his hands. Li Huaqing silently pondered for a moment. Suddenly he was startled. The instant his eyes focused, he saw that Lin Guoqiang was also looking at him with a thoughtful look in his eyes. Li Huaqing's eyes narrowed slightly for a moment, and his smile became more obvious. "I'm also a little hungry, and I happen to have something to communicate with Wudi. Let's go together." Lin Guoqiang, who didn't show any abnormality, respectfully led Li Huaqing into the general palace. This was the place where Dongqing Wudi usually worked and lived in the Hidden Dragon Sea. It was called Iron and Blood in the period of Qi Beizong. After Dongqing Wudi came, it was renamed General. There were 2 courtyards, the front yard for work and the backyard for living. However, because of his origin, this was also the most deserted building in the Hidden Dragon Sea. For work, Dongqing Wudi preferred to go to the army headquarters building. In terms of living, Dongqing Wudi was often dragged to the Bai family's manor by Qingzhao. So when the giants who walked in the Hidden Dragon Sea occasionally saw Dongqing Wudi in their spare time, They would joke that it was not easy to see him here. The color in the office area of the general palace was a solemn and somewhat gloomy pure black, which was in sharp contrast with the ruddy face of Dongqing Wudi. "What are you so happy about?" Li Huaqing asked with a smile. "You know." Dongqing Wudi grinned. Li Huaqing didn't say anything for half a minute. He and Dongqing Wudi had known each other for many years, but he really didn't find that the god of massacre could be so playful. The corners of Li Huaqing's mouth twitched awkwardly. He looked at Dongqing Wudi, who opened the paper bag of spiced beef, and said casually, "About Tunlon?" Dongqing Wudi's smile paused for a moment, and then he said softly, "Yes." His eyes were in a trance for a moment, and his voice had emotions that Li Huaqing couldn't hear. "I've been waiting for this day." The Dongqing clan has been waiting for this day for many years. He had a strong desire to talk, and he didn't even care who the audience was. Or he had decided to reveal something to Li Huaqing. "Finally! Congratulations." Li Huaqing's voice was also a little complicated. He was gratified and worried. He was gratified that Zhongzhou State finally had an absolutely invincible expert in the dark world, but he was worried about the risk that Emperor Dong's palace was about to go out of control. Absolutely invincible. It was easier said than done. Throughout the hundreds of years of history since the founding of Zhongzhou State, there were very few people who could be called absolutely invincible. The first was a name that was already a little vague in the history books, but it was famous in Beihai province. Wang Kanglin, the predecessor of the Wang family of Beihai. A considerable part of the initial foundation of the Wang family of Beihai was laid by him. The second was naturally the first heavenly son after the founding of the Wang family of Beihai. The third was the first war god of Zhongzhou State and the ancestor of the Lin clan, Lin Xinyuan. Zhongzhou State changed from the guardian of the country to the war god of Zhongzhou State from him. The legend of him and the heavenly son of Beihai was still deeply rooted in people's hearts hundreds of years later. The fourth was Li Xiuxin, the ancestor of the Li family in his later years. It was because of him that the Li family existed today. The Li family started from Li Xiuxin and had produced 9 generations of war gods in a row for hundreds of years. Even though he rarely fought in his later years, he could already be considered absolutely invincible. The fifth was Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong couldn't even be counted as one, only half. The Sword Emperor was once invincible and ranked first on the divine list. But he still had opponents. Li Guangtu and Lin Fengting might not be his opponents, but they could still pose a threat to him. The period of Wang Tianzong's absolute invincibility was that night in Mormons. That night was long for the dark world, but it was too short for the real environment. In that state, Wang Tianzong's combat capability alone could be said to be the real peak since the founding of Zhongzhou State. Even Li Tianlan couldn't surpass him now. But everything was too short. It was directly ended by the almost eternal sword. In the era when Wang Tianzong didn't show up, Li Tianlan was already absolutely invincible in this era. Evidence? The battle that had spread throughout the dark world was enough to explain everything. Gu Xingyun, Jiang Shangyu, Li Guangtu, the old and the new era, the 3 super experts who stood at the peak of the dark world, all became the background of Li Tianlan's glory. This battle meant the complete rise of Emperor Dong's palace. It also meant that this era would eventually become the era of East Emperor and the dark world of Li Tianlan. Li Huaqing sighed softly and suddenly asked, "Is Li Tianlan your son?" In the past, this was definitely a very abrupt question, even enough to be said to be earth-shattering. The giants all had their own guesses and inferences in their hearts. But Li Huaqing was the first one who really asked it in front of Dongqing Wudi. Li Huaqing stared at Dongqing Wudi closely without blinking. In the face of this question that had been hidden for more than 20 years and the great pressure brought by Li Huaqing, Dongqing Wudi just raised his eyebrows slightly and nodded calmly and naturally. Yes. The corners of his mouth rose. Under the soft light, his clear smile was like the moment when he gave the order before leading an army to battle. He was wild and unrestrained, baring his teeth and brandishing his claws. Chapter 1195. Li Huaqing looked at Dongqing Wudi quietly for a long time. He was Dongqing Wudi's son. In fact, he had this speculation for a long time, and he even quietly asked Li Honghe to confirm it. It was just that Li Honghe had been vague at the beginning, which seemed to be a clear denial. Now that he knew the truth and thought about it, the other party's answer was actually equivalent to saying nothing. Fox. Thinking of the dead old Li Huaqing subconsciously shook his head and sighed, "I really envy you." These words were definitely from the bottom of his heart. Li Tianlan was from the Dongqing clan. In this way, the richest and most powerful family in the military headquarters had more than just a successor. Li Huaqing could totally imagine how high Li Tianlan would elevate the Dongqing clan in the future. All their efforts now would be rewarded enough to make people lose their minds. How could the academics and Li Huaqing, who had been bitterly pursuing the right to speak in the military and the special warfare system, not be jealous? If Li Tianlan had not been born in the Dongqing clan but in the academics, everything they had worked so hard to plan and pursue now would be almost at their fingertips. Envy. Dongqing Wudi's flamboyant smile was a little weird, which made his expression more complicated. Do you envy me? Shouldn't I be envious? Li Huaqing looked at him calmly and smiled. You're envious of me because you know the outcome. Dongqing Wudi was silent for a while, then twitched the corner of his mouth. At that time, we didn't know it would be like this. I envy you, huh? Dongqing Wudi watched Emperor Dong's palace soar into the sky and Li Tianlan soar into the sky. The arrogant and invincible arrogance filled the whole dark world. That was his son. Relief, excitement, and ecstasy. There were all kinds of emotions in Dongqing Wudi's heart, but when all the most intense emotions rolled in his heart, there was still a touch of confusion left in his heart. He really did not think that he was worthy of being envied. What Bai Qingqian didn't know was that Dongqing Wudi firmly opposed the so-called future plan at the family meeting when they exchanged Li Tianlan for Dongqing Rushi. He had never thought of letting his son become a supreme heaven's chosen one. He had never thought of making his son the national war god of Zhongzhou state. Nor did he want his son to carry the burden of the entire giant group in the future. That's his pet son. He hoped that his young self would grow up healthily, happily, peacefully and carefreely by his side. At that top-secret family meeting, Dongqing Wudi finally failed to withstand the pressure from the whole family. So he took Li Tianlan back to Dongqing Rushi. After more than 20 years of marriage, Dongqing Wudi was emotionally unstable almost every time he saw Bai Qingqian. He didn't even return to his home in Zhongyuan province. Instead, he stayed in the Border Control Corps all year round. Swift Thunder, Pegasus, Bloodbath, Yellow Sand. His footprints had been to every corner of the Border Control Corps. In the countless times when his emotions had almost completely collapsed, he could only choose to kill. As a result, the name of the god of massacre spread throughout the dark world. In Zhongzhou state, he was an almost invincible god of massacre. In the Border Control Corps, he was an invincible god. Outside Zhongzhou state, countless people were crazily cursing Dongqing Wudi to die a horrible death and have no descendants. Unfortunately, those people were disappointed. His son stood at the top of the world in his early 20s. Looking back on the past 20 years, in a melancholy and joyful mood, Dongqing Wudi really didn't feel that he had anything to envy. This result was the best result that the Dongqing clan had expected. But at that time, it was a result full of uncertainties. Was it really worth what he had endured for more than 20 years for this uncertain result? The result is always good. Li Huaqing chuckled. Dongqing Wudi was silent and finally shook his head. He said the thoughts that had flashed in his mind countless times over the years. If I can do it again, Dongqing Huangtu will only be Dongqing Huangtu, not Li Tianlan. Dongqing Huang, Li Huaqing muttered to himself and suddenly said, Does Tianlan know his background? He has noticed it, but he hasn't officially admitted anything. I guess he won't admit anything. Dongqing Wudi smiled bitterly, but he didn't feel upset about it. He could probably understand Li Tianlan's inner thoughts and the obstacles in some ideas. It was human nature. But although Li Tianlan had never called him and Bai Qingqian mom and dad so far, Qin Weibai, his daughter-in-law, called them naturally. Even in front of Li Tianlan, she never changed the way she called them. It could be seen that Qin Weibai really wanted Li Tianlan to integrate into the Dongqing clan. Although the final result was still hard to say, now it seemed that the Dongqing clan had exchanged Li Tianlan's son for Dongqing Rushi and Qin Weibai's 2 daughters. Messy thoughts spread out uncontrollably. Li Huaqing ate a piece of beef and said in a vague voice, "Mind telling me the story of that year?" Dongqing Wudi hesitated for a second and said lightly, "It's all a story." Li Huaqing glanced at him, nodded, and didn't ask again. It was all a story, all the past. It didn't matter whether he told it or not. "What's your attitude toward Li Guangtu?" Li Huaqing asked bluntly. After confirming Li Tianlan's origin, he saw clearly the bond between him and the Dongqing clan, which undoubtedly reduced the possibility of Emperor Dong's palace getting out of control. But Li Huaqing would not let go of what should be balanced. In fact, Li Huaqing had always been optimistic about Li Tianlan, which had never changed from the beginning to the present. But he was not optimistic about the ambitious Jiang Shangyu and Gu Xingyun. In fact, he thought that what he was doing now was not against Li Tianlan. What he wanted was balance. From another perspective, correcting and curbing the future development of Emperor Dong's palace, and Li Tianlan was also responsible for him and Zhongzhou state. He hoped to persuade Dongqing Wudi. He was ready for benefits and bargaining chips. As long as he could persuade Dongqing Wudi, then Dongqing Wudi would be very sure to persuade Li Tianlan. Not to mention his origin, even if Li Tianlan was not Dongqing Wudi's son, the giant group's efforts and protection for him were obvious to all. When Dongqing Wudi came forward, it was extremely difficult for Li Tianlan not to give him face. Dongqing Wudi's drinking movement was slightly stiff, and even his expression was stiff for a moment. His attitude? Dongqing Wudi shook his head subconsciously and gave an imperceptible wry smile. He didn't want to have this attitude. But he had to have it. It was even related to some of the deals between the Dongqing clan and the Li family. The Li family would try its best to cultivate Li Tianlan and treat him as the heir of the Li family. And the future child of Li Tianlan and Dongqing Rushi would inherit the Li family. Li Honghe gave the Dongqing clan a glorious future. And at that time, and at the time of his death, he repeatedly made a request. The only request. The old man just hoped that if one day the purgatory of Heaven Capital and Li Guangtu were really at the end of their rope, the old man hoped that the Dongqing clan could give him a chance. Li Honghe's original voice still rang in his ears. Now facing the captive Li Guangtu, what attitude could he have? You're tuning in to the Wandering Hero YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.